We measure a lot of blood tests, and we see a lot of elite athletes. We look at their blood tests, and what you find when you look under the hood is a metabolic disaster, inflammation. So to your point, if you're not focusing on those essential behaviors that define us as humans, we really can't work on anything else. Humans were evolved as a walking species, and we've taken that out of our day-to-day lives, and we just need to figure out ways to get it back.
Your lymphatic system is the sewage system of your body, and your lymphatic system is handling all the proteins, all the waste, all the lymph, and you make 3 or 4 liters of that a day, kind of move that around. And if you're not flexing your muscles, you're not flushing the toilet. Calf is such an important second heart in the body, but if you don't use your calf, you're gonna come up against these type 1 errors of stressors or degradation of total capacity of the system.
You can't just be sitting there all day at work in front of your computer for 8 hours and then go out there and go to the gym for an hour and expect that to counteract the negative behavior of being sedentary all day. I'm so glad to have both of you here today. I've been such a huge fan for a long time, and I didn't get a chance to tell you this, but when your book Built to Move first came out, I probably bought the copy like immediately, and I did not realize personally, I thought I was going to the gym and I was doing really well, and I was getting my cardio in and getting my strength training in. But I had no idea about mobility, and I had no idea about just movement in general and how important it is. And you've made that your life mission. And I don't think a lot of people really think about this. So it's not in their regular routines to think about mobility and just movement in general. And your book was an aha moment to me. And it's such a privilege to be able to share this with the audience of this podcast, because it really does change lives completely. And I'd love to hear from both of you. Having both of you here is another incredible privilege. I'd love to hear from both of you how you happened upon this inkling of a thought of making movement such a priority in people's routines.
You take a swing?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Well, we should define mobility for
please.
people first, because I think what you see now on the internet is everything is mobility. I'm doing mobility. I'm like, actually, you're just walking, you know? So when we started, we wrote a book 13 years ago called Becoming a Supple Leper, which is really a textbook about sort of trying to understand complex movement, especially complex human movement phenomenon.
Right.
And how do we shift and restore that back to normative values? So we have clear vital signs on so many health markers now.
Yes.
People are comfortable with it, and we've expanded those. But we ask them, what should your hip be able to do? And they're like, not hurt, right? So when we first took a crack at this, we were like, you should have normative range that every physician, every physical therapist agrees on. This is what a human shoulder should do, right? We have these benchmarks. Doesn't matter how special you are. Your hip moves this way, independent of how, tall you are and, who your parents were. And then we were really, also kind of keyed up about how do you have control over that range of motion? So that was the first piece, and very technical. And now what I'd say is, if we define mobility as, can you do what you want to do with your body? And can you do it in a pain-free way? So we're really trying to shift this into how do we give you as many movement choices as you possibly can, and how do you do that in a pain-free way? And when we ask people about how does your body feel? Are you pain-free? And oftentimes we see that pain is so endemic and so common to so many people, and we think it is just as a natural thing. I just live with this. And what we want to show people is that one of the ways that you can improve movement choice, improve freedom, improve how you feel is improve your movement to restore that freedom of movement, which doesn't have to change as you age. And secondarily, part of the path to getting you out of pain is to restore your body's natural ability to have access to these shapes and positions.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, when you say restore your body's natural ability to do this, I think it's important to highlight the fact that your body, if you're not using it, these natural movements over time and as we age, you lose them. It's like
any other system.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I like, and so especially since you're a doctor, I love at every hospital, there's a wide hallway. Like it's always double wide.
Yes.
So that is your mobility when you're 20. You know, when you're 20, you
Cut
can
off your hand, it grows back the
you
next
can
Yes,
pick up a
exactly.
new sport. If your friend
So
invites
true.
you on an adventure, you can say yes. At 20, you never say, "Oh, I don't run anymore because my knee hurts." But as we age, we all start to see that hallway begins to narrow. And what we don't want is to become 70 and have the hallway have narrowed so much that our only movement choice is to sit in our lazy boy and watch TV. That's sort of the worst case scenario, or end up in a skilled nursing facility. And I think we see it though even sooner. Like, you know, we're at 50, but starting in our 40s, we started to see even just our local friends no longer be able to go jogging. You know, in 25, everybody runs for exercise. They go out for a jog. But then at 45, you notice everybody has switched to a bike. That's just one sort of obvious way that people start seeing their movement and mobility hallway get narrowed as we age. And unlike some of the inevitable things about aging, we actually don't have to lose our mobility as we age, and we can regain a lot of it if we actually put some attention to it, which I think is so important, because in this conversation about how we live well and live long, it really has to be about what can we control. And this is actually one of those things we can control for free on our living room floors.
Right. I mean, what I love about your book as well is, for the first time, me being a physician, medical school, residency training, all of it, we were never really given biomarkers of mobility.
That's right.
Right. And so, we have biomarkers for everything. Like people track their weight, people track their skeletal muscle mass, have blood tests. We have so many biomarkers, but mobility is completely underappreciated and ignored until it's too late, until you get an injury or there's a problem, right? And so I love how you brought this so much more forward into human consciousness with the book, and you gave people 10 biomarkers of mobility in the book. And I'd love to talk about those further as well.
Well, we like you feel like we need to democratize this information.
Yes.
And always putting someone with a physio, putting someone with a strength coach, that always works, but it doesn't always scale. And what we've realized is that if we can put this power back into people's homes, into their households, that's where we're going to begin to work on this. And just like anything else, I mean, I think people go on this health pilgrimage, and they it's like you're a 3-day Carl Rogers. Like you're like, today I'm unconditional positive regard for myself, and in 3 days you're sort of like back on the cigarettes and donuts, right? And it's difficult. We sort of prioritize the first order of magnitude of any change in behavior is to say, where is the person? Where do they have agency and control in their lives? Where are we going to put in these health behaviors, these movement behaviors? And then secondarily, how can we put exposure as the first order sort of priority? Before we start getting into very fancy tools and fancy all sort of practices, let's make sure that you are at least exposed. And what we look at is, if we take a movement diet of someone for the day, usually there's about 3 ingredients. I lay down, I sit at the edge of the bed, I sit at the table, I sit in the car, sit at the desk, I sit right, and then I lay down.
A lot of
and
sitting.
that's all we're doing. So if forget about the sedentariness, which is a side problem. I'm just not asking my body to do what it needs to do. I'm not putting my arms over my head. I'm not taking a big breath. I have no hip extension. My shoulders didn't internally rotate. And it is very much a use it or lose it. Your brain is an adaptation machine. Adaptation is number one. And you're constantly adapting to your environment. I think we sort of fail to appreciate that because the body is so robust in such a beautiful, complex system, until that error message pops up, right? Where suddenly, hey, my knee hurts. And I haven't done anything differently, but suddenly my knee hurts every stair, everything, or you've got a foot pain. And of course, we can layer in genetics and changes in your physiology as you age, and we can be, but one of the things we can ask is, well, does my body do what it needs to do? Am I loading it in a way that allows me to maintain access to these tissues and load these tissues? So, the short is that if you want to have, if we take this fancy word, mechanotransduction, right? Your tissues need physical input for your tendons to be tendons, for your muscles to be, so it takes force and load to actually signal the DNA to do what the tissue is supposed to do. And if you don't, well, then your body's just going to turn those things down.
Right.
The other thing I would add on our vital signs is that people need standards. And I think that's what's often
Absolutely.
underappreciated. We have nutrition chapter in our book, which may seem out of place for folks who are like, these people are the mobility experts. But what we've seen in our own neighborhood is that everybody knows they're supposed to eat fruits and vegetables, but how much?
Right.
How should they track that? How should they think about it? How should they build their meals and think about their plates? And we think the same thing with these movement standards. You know, we always like to say that in the old days you'd go have a physical, but in most cases there's nothing truly physical about a physical these
No.
days.
You
And
sit
so
there.
yeah, so we wanted to say, okay, well, let's have everyone have this book sitting on their coffee table, and once or twice a year give themselves a little bit of a home movement physical. And just see where they are. And what we've seen with these 10 vital signs we created is that a lot of people get a 5 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. They're doing well in certain areas, but almost everybody, including a lot of the really elite athletes we work with, have blind spots. They just have a few areas where they're like, oh my God, I cannot get up and down off the floor. And I am 37 years old. Like, that comes as a shock to people.
Absolutely.
And before we jump in, I just want to say that we're not playing defense here. We're playing offense. That we think that you actually can feel better.
Yeah.
You can have more movement choice. You can play harder. Let me give you an example. There's pickleball in America that people are pretty crazy about. And if you go on the web, you'll see that physicians and physical therapists are talking about like the dangers of pickleball, the most dangerous sport in America right now. But what we're seeing is as a test of how people move. Well, you haven't moved laterally. You haven't decelerated. You haven't put a jump.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is I think pickleball is going to save America because we're in community, we're competing, we're
outside.
playing, we're outside.
all the good things. Right.
All the good things. But it turns out that when we apply a test to your physical practice, suddenly we see, oh, your physical practice of, riding an exercise bike and eating a sashimi chicken breast with this brown rice maybe is an incomplete practice.
Well,
So-
and just on the movement diet piece, if your movement diet is sitting for most of the day or laying down, and then you're standing up and asking your body to do all of these dynamic things
That you got away with.
For a long time, then it's not totally shocking that you may tear your ACL or have an Achilles
you're gonna get
issue
hurt.
or a variety of other injuries because your movement diet has been so narrow up to that point.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that, Juliet and I spent the first, I think when we were in our 30s and early 40s, we spent a lot of time working in very high performance environments. So imagine every professional sport, people whose bodies are on the line with the military, all branches of the government, and we really get to see a lot of dirty laundry. Sure. But what we've always felt like was, can we make more sense of this high performance? Because when we're under stress as humans, when there's something on the line, what we start to see is best practices all start to align. And that, one of my favorite coaches is this Dutch guy named Frans Bosch, and he says there's more variation in waltzing than there is in sprinting. And by way of that, I think he means at low load, low speed, low stress, low consequence, you can eat little chocolate donuts and smoke a cigarette and be a human being, and your body is so tolerant. But under high stress situations, we start to see that you have to pay attention as there's less tolerance in the system for silliness. You can't just go drinking and show up next day and win a world championship. We're seeing that all of those things start to align towards sort of more unified practice, unified field theory. And what we're finding now is that we have been trying to do is take those lessons of high performance and transmute them to our families, to our households, because otherwise that's just circus and entertainment. But if we take that Formula One, let's take those Formula One ideas and those spaceships and let's make them mean something to our children.
Yes, no, it's so powerful. And, I think about the patients that I see, and I've incorporated the Ready State app into our evaluations. So I have them get the app, they get the membership on it. And I tell them, like, you can cancel the membership in 7 days if you don't want to keep doing it.
Take the test.
Take the test.
Yeah.
Because I think with movement especially, it's almost like the amount of movement that you have in your body is hidden until it's too late. And most people are always surprised by their results when they get the test completed. Like you said, they have blind spots. And I think movement, the inability to move in certain planes or with certain joints of your body. I think it hides itself in the activities that you choose to do on a day-to-day basis. And that's why I think pickleball, I agree with you. It's a great test for people. A lot of people do hurt themselves because they haven't been moving in these like lateral movements and jumping and doing these things. We stop doing these things as we age, right? I think I just read somewhere or I saw somewhere on social media that, after the age of 30, only 5% of people ever sprint anymore. And even though no one's really done a study on that, that number's kind of made up. Intuitively, it makes sense. We stop doing these things because we can't do these things. It's just that we don't recognize that we've lost the ability to do these things.
Well, one of the things that we want to talk about today is, Juliet and I owned a strength and conditioning center in San Francisco for 20 years. We work alongside and in the same buildings as the world's best athletes in the Olympics. We have sucked the play and joy out of movement. It's become this really precision room, and it's very decorative. And I do my VO2 max, and I'm doing my strength training, and I think
you've got to do like your 3 days a week of strength training and 2 days a week of HIIT training, and we're like, wait, where's the play?
So how do we put that back in, this connection, and have most of the benefits of our bodies through play? And what you just hinted at is I don't think children are like, hey, Tommy, let's go sprint. But if we go through a Frisbee, I guarantee you're going to be sprinting.
You're going to be sprinting, right.
So what we need to do is think more critically about how do we create context where people have meaning and have opportunity to explore, enjoy their bodies, and also they end up doing the right thing. And then in their homes or at the gyms, we can be very truncated in terms of the level of exposure that we need. Because the gym is a really formal place where it's basically the gym. No offense to everyone, it's like taking a vitamin, right? Ideally, we're getting all of these things. You're lifting and chopping wood and moving and getting up and down off the ground, and you're doing all these things, and you're swimming and playing. But the gym is a really formal place where we can really understand inputs and outputs.
Right.
So the question is not how can we do more in the gym? Our question is how can we do less in the gym and bolster your play environmental exposure to movement?
That's such a great analogy, by the way. The supplement versus getting it from Whole Foods. It's kind of the same thing with movement, right? When you go to
and
the
we
gym.
love squatting. We love we're all about the gym. We think the gym is so fun.
Yeah, and I just want to tell a quick story about a good friend of ours who is a high-level professional, works super hard, but his movement diet was working really hard and Pelotoning. And then he was invited on a fantasy ski trip to Greenland, which he, of course, said yes to. And then he had
and he was a good athlete in college.
Good athlete in college. Lean, all of his other biomarkers were probably great. Goes on the ski trip and has a catastrophic knee injury in Greenland. And I think what people forget about these kinds of injuries is how much they just take you out of your community. So much of us, especially now in the era where so many fewer people are going to church, for example, in many cases, our movement community becomes our community. It becomes our church of sorts. And so the moment that you have a catastrophic injury like that and are removed from your community, it's not just the injury you have to fix, but you also now have someone who is, isolated from their community, not able to move. And in many cases, those kinds of injuries are preventable by having a much more diverse movement diet.
By playing offense.
By playing
Working on
offense.
performance, not trying to do injury prevention.
So that when you are invited on the adventure like that, you can say yes and know that you have a body that is prepared to do an adventure like that, which is, I think, what we all want, especially as we age.
That's such a good point. I mean, when you injure yourself at a younger age, you end up having to stay home and just healing, and you get taken out. It happened to me once. I was doing a box jump, and it was a little bit too high, and the box was unstable. I was like one of those memes on Instagram, and I missed.
So say we all.
Right. I missed a wedding that I was supposed to go to, and I just felt horrible. I felt like I was completely out of the community for that time. That I had to sit home and have my hip heal. And as you age, though, we all know the statistics around falling. Not only can it take you out of your community, it can take you off the planet, right?
Yes.
And so I think it starts earlier, in earlier ages, to really maintain that mobility so you avoid the fall later on.
Yeah.
Right? And keep in mind our bias and blind spot is we're like tissue health. We're interested in movement. We're interested in having you have like adamantium bones. We're super into that. And, one of the things that we're really looking at is, hey, longevity is great. we really think that this conversation about, hey, how are we setting ourselves up to actually have an incredible life? But we think, because we're on the pointy end of the stick, we want you to be durable.
Right.
And for us, it doesn't matter how great your mitochondrial health is. When you fall and you're weak or your bones or something happens to you, you can't take the hit. And as you get into your 50s, the hits are coming.
Absolutely.
And we want to build this reserve. And what's great is we can have multiple bottom lines at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I
I'm
was just
sorry.
going to add that, I've got a good friend who's a financial advisor, and he always talks to me about how people, when he meets with his clients to talk about their financial future and saving, they don't really want to talk about the money piece. They instead want to talk about what they want to do with their bodies when they're older. And of course, it's very personal. Some people just want to be able to go to Disneyland and survive a day with their grandchildren. Other people want to continue to do radical adventures. But literally everybody has, physical goals, movement goals. And yet we don't save for that or plan for that. So we think it's totally normal to save money, so we have money for retirement, but we don't really think we need to sort of save money in the bank for our physical ability to be able to do the things we love, because I think that's what we all have. We all want to be able to get to places in our life, both now and in the future, where we can say yes to pickleball or adventure or being able to do whatever it is we want to do with our body that brings us joy.
Yeah, absolutely. So big picture, well, one thing that brings up for me too is, I'm in the life extension world a lot as well. We talk about lifespan extension, and lifespan extension means
And we're
nothing.
here for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Most people are looking at how do I add some more years to the end of my life now? I always ask this question whenever I go out and speak, who here wants to live to be 120? And more people are raising their hands. But the point is that you don't want to live to be 120 if you don't have your mobility, right?
No.
You want your brain and your body to be with you through this journey of these extra years. You want your health span to match your lifespan. And I think, we all know about how we need to protect our brain. The same is true for our mobility and our movement in our bodies, be able to protect that so that we have that as we add these years to our life, right? And so I think, this whole conversation about mobility, like you had mentioned earlier, there's multiple aspects to it. And I want to kind of dive in deeper into each aspect of those. One aspect is eliminating the sedentary behavior from our life. I think that's kind of its own conversation that we need to have. Breathing is part of this conversation as well. You had mentioned that a little bit earlier as well. So I want to make sure we talk about that. And then also the last aspect, of course, or maybe there's more aspects to this. I'm sure you guys have many more aspects, but in my mind, it's how do we maintain mobility across our joints over time as well. Would you add any other broad categories to the conversation?
I think those hit some big ones.
Yeah, and just keep in mind that we're not saying exercise is important.
Right.
But we do know a lot of people who are in their hundreds and their 90s who've never exercised a day in their lives.
Great point.
Right. But
Great point.
when we just filter out,
Yeah.
we can say, what is it about that was remarkable about their lives that were different than our lives that got them here, besides good genetics, right? But hey, there's meaning, there's community, right? There's feeling loved and feeling safe. All of those things are valid. So if we accidentally omit something like that, I just want to keep in mind that, we like to say the brain is the most sophisticated structure in the universe, attached to a physiology that is equally as complex and miraculous in a psycho-emotional environment where human beings are interacting, and it's complicated. And that's okay that it's complicated, because the systems are so complex and set up for that, that simple inputs make big changes.
Yeah, it's so true. And it all kind of feeds into each other, right? If you don't have your mobility, you don't have your community. It's so
That's right.
it's all intertwined. And so looking at life in these buckets, I think it doesn't really work. You have to look at it all together. So to your guys' point, how do you blend movement into your life so that you can use it as part of fostering community, fostering love, safety? All these things makes a big difference, right?
Sure. I'll take a swing at it just on the
Yeah.
sedentary piece. And as a side note, we wrote a book actually in 2015 called
Yes,
Desk Bound, and we
yes.
were really one of the first people to popularize the standing desk. And people sort of made us the standing desk people for a while, and we're like, no, we're pro sitting. We had to sort of try to correct the impression that we created out there. But Kelly actually did a talk at Google way back in 2010 about not sitting so much. And the reason for that is we owned a gym for many years, and we also had an in-house physical therapy clinic. And he started to see this sort of connection in his clinical practice between people who came in and were so shocked that they'd torn their ACL or had some other injury, and only to learn that they were, sitting for 12 hours a day and then getting up and trying to train for a triathlon for 1 hour. And so he just started making this connection, and we started seeing it in kids and adults. And the thing that we hope we leave people with is what we've tried to do in our own home, and sometimes we've given tours of what our home looks like, is we recommend people try to make their homes and their office movement rich, to create movement rich environments. Because again, people are being given so many inputs about what to do, so many listicles, and they become overwhelmed. And so our whole job is to figure out in our own life, how can we make making the right choice not even a thought? Kelly always likes to say, if we have cookies in the house, we're going to eat cookies. So
Right.
we just don't have cookies in the house.
Right.
The same goes for movement. So if you look at our house, we work from home sometimes. So we have places where we can stand while we work and sit while we work. If you followed me around during a work day, I would stand for part of the day, sit for part of the day, sit on the floor for part of the day. I would be standing on balance boards and little things called slack blocks. But what you'd see if you had a hidden camera on me is that I'm in constant movement. And that's just become standard practice for me for my workday. Because again, sitting isn't bad. It's these long bouts of sedentarism that are not good for us on a myriad of levels. And so we've just really tried to create a home and an office that invites more movement without thinking. And we also have toys everywhere. Speaking of play, if you come in through our garage, there's frisbees, there's baseballs, there's balance boards, there's a pull-up bar, there's gym equipment. We have that kind of stuff sprinkled around our house. So we just try to make it easy to say, okay, I'm going to grab a toy, or I'm going to stand on a balance board. In our living room where our TV is, we have a basket full of mobility tools, because we feel like, well, I'm sitting on the floor already and there's a ball, so I'm going to work on my calf a little bit tonight. So we've just really tried to figure out how to create movement rich environments so that it's not one more thing you have to do. Your environment is set up to help you make the right choices when it comes to movement.
And let's go ahead and give you a vital sign there.
Please.
So Harvard defines sedentary behavior as falling below 1.5 metabolic equivalents.
Right.
So you remember the old treadmills? You're like, Mets, I'm doing
Yeah.
7 Mets.
So you
I'm
see
killing it.
Mets on the Stairmaster.
And people have people have lost their minds. Like, we don't know what a Met is anymore, but it's just it's a measure of work, like an erg or a watt, right? Just a measure of kind of work. And when you stand up, you're automatically above 1.5 metabolic equivalents.
Got it.
And so what we're trying to do is say, hey, let's limit the total time you spend underneath 1.5 metabolic equivalents, like we are now, for 6 hours a day. And so that's aggregate all the time you're spending not moving. That means you fall into this sedentary behavior bucket. And then what we see is people are like, well, I go run. I'm like, well, that doesn't cancel out the fact that you're not moving your body. And there's a whole lot of things here. You're going to see more calories burned if that's important to you. If you move around during a little bit more, you'll find that you have better circulation and that you won't get cankles. And what we find is that oftentimes people are trying to, squeeze in their exercise in between busy schedules. And one of the best ways we know to warm up is don't ever cool down. So if you're fidgeting, moving, standing, prepping, you can sneak out for that run and come back and not sit and continue to move, and you'll still do better. So whether it's fasting, looking at your blood sugar, looking at sort of brain fog and engagement, turns out if we can just create an environment where we're not cued to just sit down more, we'll tend to have more movement choices. Again, we're not anti-sitting, but it turns out there's a lot of sitting naturally that's going to happen in our lives. So let's spend those sitting credits when we're having dinner.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Let's spend those sitting credits on the things. And, what we want people to understand is sitting on the ground is not the same thing as sitting. So we see that as a root behavior, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
Yes.
But again, the first order of sort of operations here is to ask, well, I'm supposed to get all of these things done. and I'm a busy working person,
Right.
and maybe I have a family, when and where am I going to do this? So how do we begin to set these metrics where I don't have to make another choice, but my environment is built around physical practice, and I'll end up doing the right thing incidentally?
Yeah.
And let me just give one quick example of that.
Sure.
You know, standing desks have become very common.
Right.
And we actually are not fans of the ones that move up and down automatically.
Why is that?
Because what we see is people stand for a little while. They're like, oh, my
It's hard
feet
work.
hurt, my back hurt, it's hard work, I'm not comfortable. And then they sort of press the down button and then it never goes back up again. And so our preference is to have a standing desk that is set at standing height, but with a stool. So that when you're tired, you do have a place to sit
And that's called
rest.
perching, like a bar
You can
stool,
perch on, like you
which
do.
is above 1.5 metabolic
Yes,
equivalents.
perching is still above 1.5 mets. But we think you just take the decision out for yourself. Your desk is at standing height, period end. There's no choice here. You've removed the choice. You know, we're kind of lazy as human beings. We're always going to kind of choose what's easier. So you still have the opportunity to sit and rest if you're sick or tired or you just, worked from your workout. You still have the opportunity to sit on a stool. But when given the chance, you can take these little moments for 20 minutes, 15 minutes to actually stand during the day. And again, if you have a workstation set up like that, already your movement diet in your day has added on like 10 different ways in which your body's had to move because you're perching, you're standing, you're more likely to fidget when you're standing. Right. So you've already added so much to your movement diet and you've just taken your own choice out of it. You've just like, this is where my standing desk is. This is where I will be. And if I need to sit, it's on a stool.
So everyone, if you're standing, elbow to the ground, plus 1 inch. That's how high your desk should be. And what I want to keep reminding people is probably adults are listening to this podcast, right?
Yeah.
That we're interested, suddenly like, wow, I'm starting to see that these things matter more. I didn't realize how much they would matter. But everything we talk about, and this goes across any aspect of health, I want you to think, now apply it to my kids.
Right.
So we see these growing bodies that aren't being loaded, that our bones grow really fast. Connective tissue, muscles grow less fast. So we see diseases like Osgood-Schlatter's, we see Sever's disease, where all of a sudden kids are sort of being bowstrung, right? They're caught in this growing machine. We're not telling the connective tissue and musculature, hey, you need to compensate and grow along with the frame.
Sure.
So suddenly kids get real stiff. Their hamstrings you wake up one day, your children are going to just go through these growing spurts and the kids are going to be like, my back hurts, my knee hurts. And they're just in this massive growing spurt. Now take that human being and confine them to a classic chair and
Exactly.
you see it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And now we start to get into less play, less total movement. And we have as an organism that's never exposed and to the sort of rigors of being a human being or to the positions and shapes that allow us to grow more effectively and map those movement patterns for later. And then we become adults and suddenly we're now trying to undig.
Exactly. And I love your charity organization, which is getting standing desks, right, to kids in schools,
Yeah.
because one of the things I see is this whole sitting behavior that's part of our culture. It starts from putting kids in school where they're forced to sit for hours and hours in a
Yep.
day, and then
Yeah.
it becomes the norm, right?
We saw in our kids in first grade, all the kids come into first grade and they all run like Usain Bolt. They're all little Sha'Carri Richardsons. They're just
Yes.
brilliant sprinters,
Right.
100%. And halfway through the first grade, the cohort splits and we start to see fundamental changes in their primary movement patterns of running.
Interesting.
So instead of running on the ball of the foot, the way we would do barefoot, the way all children run, the way the sprinters run, half the kids start heel striking. Which is like saying, hey, we're going to develop these fine motor skills with our hands, but halfway through the first grade, we're going to have some of the kids switch to left-handedness.
Right.
And what we have to ask is, well, what did the environment change? How did it change? Why did these kids adapt?
Yeah.
We work at field day for our kids when they were in elementary school. And what it means is we saw that kids were suddenly stiff, so stiff they couldn't pick up their leg to get into the sack for the sack race. They couldn't do a two-legged hop.
Right.
They couldn't perform a forward somersault. We were like, oh, we have those kids adapting innocuously, passively to their environments. And what we're starting to see is those who have and those who have not.
The other thing that is so great about the standing desk is, especially for kids, is that, I think everybody's aware we have a real crisis in kids' health these days. All of the metrics are not looking good. But what is really difficult is to, especially in the school environment, is to bring in a program. We've worked with so many schools who are like trying to add, they hire a coach and try to bring a movement program in before school. But, that's difficult. You need a person to run the program. You need someone who's excited about it. Chances are they're not going to be paid that well. It may not be a long-term solution. But if you just plop a standing desk in an elementary school, kids immediately get it and understand. They adapt to it really quickly. Like our daughter Caroline, who's now 16, she was at an elementary school where she never sat at a sitting desk her entire elementary school.
Oh, that's incredible. Was that because you had provided them with desks?
Yes, we provided them with desks. And
The first all-standing school in the world.
the kids had quickly adapted to it. They didn't know any different. They were like, "This is what we do. We stand."
There's a place to put their foot. So they're not cashiers.
They
They
can
don't have. They can sit on the ground. They can fidget.
But it was just sort of a one-time passive investment, right? It didn't require an ongoing teacher or coach or someone to administer a program. It's just a piece of furniture that's sitting there that completely changes the environment and completely changes how these kids move through their environments. And we saw parents saying, "Oh my God, my kid is actually sleeping so much better." And we're like, "Yes, because kids need to, you
So-
want to tire out kids." And they were able to focus better. A lot of boys in particular who tend to have, more energy were like not punching their neighbor as much because they were given an opportunity to move their bodies and fidget.
Exactly.
Because the last thing kids need is to be told to sit still. That's not how their brains work. It's not how they learn.
So I just want to
go ahead.
just tell everyone, when we apply these principles, they're principles to human beings, and they apply to you, and they apply to children, and they apply to any age. Dr. Mark Bendham is a researcher around sedentary behavior at Texas A&M, and he has done long-term, multi-year studies of watching kids move, watching their focus, tracking their attention, and universally, when kids move more, they do better, just like human beings, right? And one of the things he saw was that typically in elementary school, kids add 1 to 2 BMI points every year, just naturally.
Wow.
And when they put an intervention of having movement choice, and again, that's not talking about sitting, standing, just movement choice. I can sit, I can stand, I can perch. He saw that those kids lost 1 to 2 BMI points every year. So over a delta, what you'd see is some kids would lose 4 BMI points and some kids would gain 4 BMI points over 2 years. That's a delta of 8 BMI points by doing nothing, having
literally
a structural
just putting,
intervention.
Yeah, just
Yes.
putting
Where you
a
didn't
piece
have
of
to
furniture
teach
in.
or motivate or
standing desk.
do anything else. So let's take that principle, which is, again, this is just the research. I'm not saying, but then what are the choices for me if I'm moving more in the day? That means I might have a little bit more caloric play.
Right.
I don't have to be so sort of restricted and managed because I'm not moving much. Plus, I need to load, I need to be engaged. And this is just a different way of sort of viewing the world, especially since our world is changing so much.
I look at my kids and, just naturally, they're 10 and 7 years old. They don't want to be under 1.5 mets ever unless they're sleeping, right? And so forcing them to sit at a desk makes them very fidgety. And I'm sure it affects their concentration, which affects how well they're getting the things that are being taught to them, et cetera. So I'm sure there's, maybe you guys know of the research, but maybe it probably also affects their scores on their tests.
The research is critical and very clear. When kids do some exercise in the morning, they tend to perform better on tests, right? They have less anxiety. That shouldn't be miraculous. One of the things that Juliet was a big proponent of in our community is we started a walking school bus. Most kids, 80 or 90% of the kids live within a mile and a half of school.
Still,
Right, they're elementary schools.
Right.
But a lot of parents didn't feel comfortable about their kids walking. We're all children of the 80s, I understand. There's always a kidnapper van around the corner. And so Juliet said, well, hey, look, we're going to walk to school every day. Drop your kids off with us, and we'll always have an adult.
Yes.
So we had a walking school bus, and we would take
you were the bus driver.
We were the bus drivers.
20 and 30 kids would walk with us to
Yeah.
school,
Yeah.
right? Where there's always an adult. We're making sure kids aren't, getting sucked down the drains. And lo and behold, parents started walking with us too. And what we ended up seeing is that parents would report back. They're like, wow, I had this really great interaction with my kid because we had a mile walk or 3/4 of a mile walk. And I was able to interact, and it wasn't like, get out of the car, do you have your thing? And the kid was settled and ready for school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, the miraculous part for me was that parents came up to us and they were like, Kelly, this changed my life. And we're like, Juliet and I are always like, our standard question is like, tell us more. And they're like, I lost 20 pounds. I'm like, hold up. You lost 20 pounds walking a mile with your kids to school and back every day, 4 days a week?
That's awesome.
And it was that easy just to create more movement richness. And again, this was just something I have to do, and it's not such a huge lift. We could still be adults. We still had to be at the office at 8:30.
Yeah, that was often a critique I would get. People would say, well, I can't walk my kid to school because I have a job. And I was like, well, actually, I also have a job. And,
You can fit it in.
yeah.
Right,
And,
right.
but yeah, I mean, it was the walking school bus was just this really lovely, miraculous experiment.
Yeah.
And just took us out of the madness that is the drop off lane, which is, I'm sure, an experience that you're probably and most parents are familiar
I did
with.
it this morning.
Yeah, you did
I
it this morning. And,
yeah.
and you know,
Out of the car.
and we appreciate that not everybody lives in a place where you
Right.
can walk to school.
But if you can.
But if you can, and you know, on the standing desk piece, I think the point we're trying to make is that, you know, more movement for kids is better. And there's lots of ways around it. I mean, we think the standing desk is such a simple, easy, one-time investment in you know, intervention. But a lot of teachers and schools are doing cool things like a mile walk, where they
daily mile in
basically,
the
the
UK.
daily mile, and they don't necessarily accumulate a mile in one sitting. They will do a lesson for 15 minutes and, you know, just walk around the school for 15 minutes, but accumulate a mile over the school day, you know, trying to get more kids walking and biking to school. I mean, there's lots of ways to interject more movement into kids' lives. But I think the same principle is true for us adults.
Yes.
I mean, I think, you know, we all need more movement in our lives, but we all are time crunched. And we are as well. I think one of the points we always like to try to make is like, we're not those health influencers who are spending our days meal prepping and sitting in our sauna. Like we're in front of our computers working like most people most of the day. And so we've in our own life had to figure out how to fit in these practices on the fringes of a time crunched life. And so creating movement rich environments in our homes and in our office has been a really critical part of making sure we're just expanding our movement choice and movement diets throughout our day. And it's like a passive mobility practice.
And one of the things that is such a really resonates with me here at Next Health is that you really take a systems approach.
Sure.
Like people, one of my triggers is people are like, which is the one mobility exercise I should do? I'm like, which part of your body do you not want to use? Like, which is not important? Like, you know, I want to be jacked and shredded, but I don't want to have any friends.
Right.
Like, okay,
Right.
well, that's weird. So all of it is important. And they're all of these systems are tightly coupled,
Exactly.
especially as the human being is such a complex system. So one of the things that Juliet started to hint at is that, you know, we try to walk more. That's a simple, it's easy to do, it's democratized, egalitarian. You're going to get more than the 120 minutes a week that you're currently getting outside. That's what the research supports. You have a chance to see your neighbors. You have a chance to just get some sunshine, some light. Thank you, Huberman.
Right.
But what we're finding now is that when you start to, our benchmark is you can get the lion's share of benefits for decreases mortality and all-cause morbidity for 8,000 steps a day.
That's the magic number is 8,000.
It turned out to be a really reasonable amount too. We were like, oh, with just a little bit of kind of conscientiousness, I can hit 8,000.
Right.
What we found was 10,000, I'm out. 12,000, I'm out. I can't do it, so I'm not going to do anything. But 8,000, we could get 51% of these benefits. But what we want people to understand, as Juliet said, is that suddenly you've accumulated enough non-exercise activity fatigue
Exactly.
that you actually have sleep pressure and you need to go to sleep. But also, we were just talking downstairs, you know, your lymphatic system is the sewage system of your body. And your lymphatic system is handling all the proteins, all the waste, all the lymph. And you make 3 or 4 liters of that a day, kind of move that around. And if you're not flexing your muscles, you're not flushing the toilets.
Right.
So you're going to have stagnation. You're going to see that we're basically not engaging in these fundamental principles. And how amazing that your body put the waste management system in the muscle system, because over 2.5 million years of evolution, you did a lot of walking and a lot of dealing. And, you know, that calf is such an important second heart in the body. But if you don't use your calf, you're not going to you're going to come up against these type 1 errors of stressors or degradation of total capacity of the system. So that's a fancy way of saying, why don't we walk a little more?
Yeah, exactly. I
Right?
mean, humans were evolved as a walking species. That's how we basically have humans all over the earth. We walk there from, sub-Saharan Africa, right? I mean, that's how we got everywhere. And we've taken that out of our day-to-day lives, and we just need to figure out ways to get it back. So it's really good to know the 8,000 steps a day, and also the ability to fit this into your day-to-day life, I think, is so important, because
Everything.
you can't just be sitting there all day at work in front of your computer for 8 hours and then go out there and go to the gym for an hour and expect that to counteract the negative behavior of being sedentary all day. It needs to be part
Also,
of
we know
your-
it doesn't work.
It doesn't
And it's
work.
not working.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so just to get it really practical, I mean, I think we have some really good tips that you've given. Get a standing desk. And just, I want to double click on that standing desk just real quick. Standing desk without the up and down button on it. A stool is also preferred.
Yes, vital.
You have to have a place to put your
Yeah.
foot.
Okay. And when you say a place to put your foot, that's a bar across the bottom of the desk?
That could be a bottom of the stool. That could
Okay.
be a little box. There are these places. I don't know if you've ever heard of them called bars. People go drinking
Yeah,
there,
I
right?
remember
Of the
those.
pub.
I remember those from a couple weeks
And
ago.
what you'll see is that there's a bumper that you lean up against the
Yes,
bar, and there's a place to put your foot.
Sure.
Because the bartenders figured out that if we could support your spine, get you out of some of the extension load of being a human being by putting your foot up and a little bit of flexion, you could stand and drink all day.
You could drink a lot
Yeah,
longer.
and just from a practical standpoint, I mean, that could be an Amazon box. It could be
Sure.
like 6 copies of Becoming a Supple Leopard. I mean, it does not need to be some fancy tool that you buy.
Right.
It can also, sometimes I just stand at my desk and turn my stool around and use my stool, the base part of my stool as a footrest. So there's a lot of ways to set up the desk. And, if people already have an electronic standing desk, I just say put it up to standing and unplug it from the
Unplug it,
wall
right.
and just commit to it.
The missing piece here, because we are happy to talk about your hip extension and all the tools and means to
You
restore
were just
that.
waiting for your chance, weren't you?
Well,
Oh,
point.
it's Kelly's favorite subject.
So
hip
it's a
extension.
drinking game with our friends, right? So
The hip extension
the hip
conversation.
extension, right? But one of the things then is that notice that we've said, hey, we need you to move more during the day, and we're going to take you to the place where you have to work, and let's have it serve you so that when you leave your work, you're in a better position and a better state than you left. Right? That's something
Imagine
that we should,
that, right?
And
Get
Google
out
had
of
me
work and
come
not
in
feel like crap.
Yes.
Google had me come in 2010 because they had an epidemic of low back pain.
Makes sense.
And they were trying to figure out what is going on with their all the smart kids hunched over keyboards. One of the things that we see is that people have a little agency in the morning, and they also have a little agency in the evening. And one of the most foundational behaviors that we want everyone to engage in after this is sitting on the ground for 20 to 30 minutes in the evening.
Yes.
Because it's going to require zero energy. You're not going to have to summon willpower. Just watch your TV, answer your emails. Anytime you need to change position, feel free to change position. Lean up against the sofa. Human beings walked. We got up and down off the ground. We slept on the ground. We toileted on the ground. We hung out on the ground. We cooked on the ground. We shared on the ground. We carried resources from place to place.
Yes.
And maybe we threw something. And
Right.
that is all of human society for 2.5 million years in 4 behaviors.
Until recently.
Until recently.
So what's nice is if we know that, again, we started this conversation by saying exposure was the most important thing. So that 8,000 steps over a year is transformational.
Absolutely.
That minimizing sedentary behavior over a year is transformational. Sitting on the ground a little bit every night, you'll see that your hips will feel better. And strangely enough, remember, we come out of high performance. So some of our elite cyclists found better wattages and better powers by sitting on the ground because they were restoring their hip function.
Interesting.
Which improved their economy, their efficiency, their aero positions. And they're like, all I have to do is sit on the ground and I can go faster on the bike. Yes. Why?
Yeah.
Because your hip is now doing what hips should be able to do.
I love
And the
that.
thing we know from the data is that Americans of all socioeconomic classes are spending 3 hours a day watching television.
Sure.
So we've tried to come up with activities one can do while doing the thing we know everybody's doing, which is watching TV. And one of those is sitting on the ground. So if you come over to our house at night, and we love Netflix and we love watching Lord of the Rings and whatever else is on, and but you'll find that we're all sitting on the ground, or we're sitting on the ground for part of the time and then we're up on the couch, but we're kind of moving around positions. But what we love about the sitting on the ground thing is anyone can do it. If you're someone who's lucky enough to be able to work from home, you could take your 30 minutes as part of your work day while you're working on your laptop. You can sit at your coffee table or wherever you're able to create a setup. And the other thing I would add about the walking piece, just in terms of the practical piece, is that there are very few days where I accumulate 8,000 steps by going for a walk where I get 8,000 steps in one fell swoop. I fit it in by doing a lot of small walks and actually really almost have no problem accumulating 8,000 steps or more by doing a couple things. I usually exercise in the morning and I take a little bit of a 10-minute walk afterwards to cool down, accumulate maybe 1,000 or 2,000 steps. I try to take walks after each one of my meals. Kelly and I like to take a 20-minute walk with our dog in the evening. It's a great time for us to connect, get our dog outside, see our neighbors, recap our day.
And after a meal really helps control your glucose spikes afterwards as well.
So it has this
layered in there, give you
layered
another
in
reason,
benefit.
right?
Exactly.
And then if I have the chance during my workday and I can take one of my Zoom calls while I'm walking or take a walking meeting with one of my employees, done, check. I've gotten 8,000 steps with just those 3 or 4 sort of intentional moments of taking a walk after I eat, when I'm taking a meeting, right after I work out. It's easy to accumulate that much movement without really having to say, okay, I have to carve out an hour to go for a walk to accumulate 8,000 steps. It
Again,
never works.
we're
like
not
that.
playing defense, we're playing offense.
Playing offense, absolutely.
Right? And let me give you an example of how I apply that to a high-level, nationally ranked team at college.
Please, yeah.
We travel with the team, and in the evening, I want our team to get a little bit more movement in. I want us to we've played and battled and we've done all our things. And so after dinner, I say, hey, let's just get some circulation going again, right? And it really does enhance sleep. It gets us decongesting. And so what I say to this team is, froyo anyone? So we find a froyo place, and we walk the 10 or 15 minutes to get frozen yogurt. We all get a little frozen yogurt, and then we walk back. And buried in there, we have a chance to communicate. We get out of our rooms or off our devices.
Get some
For me,
fresh air.
I need you to get enough steps, and I need you to decongest because we're playing again tomorrow. And I think that's an example of how we're taking these very simple principles and apply them to the highest levels of sports and performance so that we can feel better in our bodies. And really, people who feel better, they're better family members, they're better members of the society, they're better parents, they're better workers, the whole thing.
Yeah. One of the things that this brings up to me during this entire conversation, number one, is the people that manufacture chairs must hate you guys. 'Cause it's all about eliminating this chair thing that we've committed
We're going to do
to.
a mid-century modern chair. Hold up.
Well, and you come from a culture where people sit on the ground and it's,
I'll show you my hip flexibility after this. I have incredible hip flexibility because we grew up sitting on the ground, crisscross applesauce.
Yes.
And I have no problem sitting on the ground and no problem squatting.
All of your aunties back home.
Yeah.
All of your family members
and I'm
can
sure your
squat,
grandparents.
butt to ankle, no problem, waiting for the bus.
Yeah.
Right? Just, it's not a big deal. And
It's not a big deal, right?
What's interesting is that when we start to, again, take these foundational practices and run them for decades.
Sure.
I think it's difficult for us. I want the immediate fix. I didn't get shredded in this 6 weeks, right? But fall risk in the elderly in cultures that toilet on the ground, sit on the ground, falls to almost zero.
Right.
Because they're getting up and down. Hip disease starts to drop. Lumbar disease starts to drop. It's almost like if you just keep moving your body is designed to last 100 years. And you're going to outlive your gonads, for sure.
Yes.
We're learning that. But you're not going to outlive your hips. And I want
Right.
people to understand that this body and frame is set up for the kinds of lifespan that you're talking about.
And it's the accumulation of the steps. It's the accumulation of sitting on the floor time over 10, 20, 30 years that leads to this incredible longevity and avoidance of falls and
Yes.
risk of injury when you're in your later years.
That's
and
right.
And you can start anytime. It's never too late to start.
No, never too late to start.
I challenge you to go to your kindergartner's class and just see if you can keep up with the up and down off the ground.
Right.
You're going to be so sore. You're going to be so exhausted. Every time your child sprints, what you're going to see is, wow, the native state of the human is to play, to interact, to be around other brains. So let's think about how we might do that and make this matter more to us, because we have a choice. We can either continue the way we're going, the way accidentally we're being shaped.
Right.
I'm not anti-phone, but it has changed how we're interacting. And I'm not anti-TV and right, but suddenly like cars are cool. But if it fundamentally changes the processes that over 10,000 years, I mean, in 10,000 years, I'm a little fatter, your femur's a little longer. We're the same humans we've been, but we were radically changed, and what we have is a human environment mismatch. So we have to be a little bit more conscientious about it.
One of the things I wish you could witness with us, Darshan, is when we go to do talks often, we'll start off in a conference room and everyone will be sitting in a chair, and then we'll say, okay, everyone, move the chairs to the side, and we're going to sit on the floor. And we'll be speaking for an hour and maybe doing some movement stuff. And I mean, the groans and the sounds we hear from people who are sort of horrified that they have to sit on the floor. They've got to get up and down off the floor. They report that the hardest thing they've done is sit on the floor for an hour during one of our talks. So it's really interesting to see how this is really, on a gigantic societal level, this weird fundamental skill that little kids and toddlers get up and down off the ground. What's like 500 times a day or something? No problems whatsoever. And we get into our 20s and 30s and 40s, and I mean literally people like struggle to get up and down off the floor, and it's actually painful for them to sit on the floor. So just
and they can't get up themselves off the floor. They need someone to like boost them up off the floor, right?
And that's the
so
number
you see
one
that a
reason
lot.
you end up in a nursing home.
Exactly.
You can't get up and down off the floor.
Right.
So your telomeres are kicking,
Yeah.
but you can't get up and down off the floor by yourself. So I'm like, hey man, we
I mean,
can
that's
have
one
both.
of your tests, right? Like one of the tests in your 10 tests is, can you get up off the floor without using your hands, without using help?
Just cross your legs, sit to the floor. Everyone can do the first part. You might fall, but you can do the first part. If you need to hold on to something, hold on to something. But I guess what we're trying to do in some of the tests is that if you have blind spots, if nothing hurts, and you're not exposed to this, why would you know that this changed?
Exactly.
Because your environment's never asking you to do it.
Right.
We get to fly everywhere, and we get people in the scanner, and we're like, wow, these people have not put their arms over their heads since Vietnam. I mean, it's been a long time since that arm has gone up, past 90 degrees.
Yeah.
And so the body's very much a creature of use it and lose it. And I want to remind people, muscles and tissues are like obedient dogs. And that there's no age where you cannot reclaim position, where your tissues will stop adapting. It'll be slower than when you were 16, truly, but your body is always ready to change and adapt.
Right. So, okay, we've talked a lot about making sure that we are moving all day, right? And part of that is getting 8,000 steps, and part of it is also during the times that you're forced to be sedentary, whether it be at work or watching Netflix, for example, find ways to keep moving around by scattering things around your house that force you to maybe exercise a little bit or do some movement. And I just want to ask one quick question on that topic. Is there a number in your mind that, say you've been sitting at your computer and you should probably think about getting up and doing something? Do you have like a number of minutes? Is it 30? Is it 45? I personally use 45 as my timer.
Yeah. That works
Is that
for
a
us.
good number?
That's
right?
great.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
we
research
don't. I think as soon as we're like, this prescriptive is like, again, we could use that. Well, aggregate your total sitting time. Is it more or less than 6 hours?
6 hours is the magic number.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you get to divide that up through the day. So there may be a time where we're going to sit down here for a couple hours.
Sure.
And that's okay.
We're going to be okay.
And I'm not going to.
We're gonna survive.
I'm still going to crush you later on in
Yeah.
pickleball.
Yeah.
But the idea here is, when you've set yourself up to do deep work. So we're fortunate enough to work with a couple presidents of the United States. And one of the things that happened with President Obama is that he had a real hard time working at a standing desk. And he
Doing
really,
like deep work, like
Sure.
when you
Work
needed to
means writing
write or really think.
Yeah.
And so, but he wasn't enjoying how his body was feeling working at this big, beautiful Koa desk that he had. And so one of the things we did was say, well, what are the choices to create more options? How do we create fidgeting? How do we create options? Because he knew this, that he needs to work at this desk to get his work done, which means, okay, so how do we shape the environment? Because we have these thumbs, and then what does the rest of the day look like so that we can say, hey, I need to be able to do this. And I just think we're clever enough, and it's not a big ask, and we're not investing billions of dollars, but we have to think differently about the issues.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons we don't want to be prescriptive about how much to sit versus stand is I'll sort of go off topic a little bit, but like we love, especially me, I love tracking I love technology
Yeah.
and tracking everything I'm doing and
Yeah.
my steps and my sleep and all this stuff. I love that stuff. But I also am super conscious of always making sure that I don't let that stuff dictate how I feel and I
Right.
actually pay attention to my own body and listen to how I feel. And I think the same goes for our movement during the day. You know, there are just days where we are get a cold or feel sick or are exhausted or had a late night or traveled. And on those days, you know, again, if you followed me around with a hidden camera, I might sit more on that day. And on the days where I feel more energetic and more awake, I'm going to be standing more and moving more around. And so I think, you know, to the extent people can sort of try to tap into how do I actually feel. And I will say you do have to sometimes go against how you feel, because if you feel lazy all the time and are sitting all the time, that's less ideal. But I also think, you know, we have to give ourselves some grace on those days where we just don't feel our best. And, you know, we're again not going to
Become
implode.
so reasonable.
We're not going to implode. You know, we're not going to implode if we have a day where we sit at our desk for most of the day.
Right.
But it's again, it's sort of like, you know, what are we talking about in the aggregate? Are we just getting enough total movement in the aggregate?
Can we talk a little bit about the walking desk as well? Because when I trained at the Mayo Clinic, they were doing research on the walking desks,
Yes.
and I was exposed to this. And I remember thinking, like, that's a pretty good idea, but I don't know how I'd feel. Can I work while I'm walking? And then fast forward 20 years later, I got myself a walking desk, and I actually find myself being more productive. I'm actually more able to work for longer periods of time with a walking desk. So for me, it works. I can use a walking desk. I've recommended them to people, and I find half the people can do it, half the people can't. So I was wondering what your thoughts were around walking desks and if they're useful.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the exact same thing in our sort of anecdotal viewing of our friends. It's about half the people really like them and find themselves to be more productive, and the other half just it's too distracting, and they've it's actually a cause of loss of focus for them. So I do think it's worth a test. The other thing I think is so cool about these walking desks now, though, is you can get them for really just these little things you put underneath your desk.
Right.
They're cheap on Amazon now.
It's not even a treadmill anymore.
Yeah, it's not
just a
even,
pad.
and that makes me so excited, because to the extent we've had conversations all day and last night about how we're all motivated to try to democratize some of this stuff. I was so delighted to see recently you can really get some affordable little treadmills to go underneath your desk. So certainly it's worth a test, and if it works for you, and I'm a fan of them, and I think if it works for you, it's awesome.
Well, and again, the principles here are, you know, if you stand on a concrete floor, your body will bark at you, right? Your tissues, the viscoelastic properties of your connective tissue, they're going to sag. You're going to start to feel your muscles kick. So keep in mind that we're a system where we have bony structures, we have connective tissue structures, muscular systems, and we're sort of switching between systems. This is a muscular pattern, this is a bony pattern, this is a fascial pattern. And if you stand on a concrete floor, your feet are going to get crampy.
Right.
And you'll start to bark at you. And so what we said was, what we need is a soft mat, right? An anti-fatigue mat. But the anti-fatigue mat was squishy enough that it had you change positions. It wasn't about the loading. It was about that you had to react, which had the muscles of your feet work, which forced you to change positions and change which structures you were using to support yourself. Well, guess what's happening when you walk really slowly? All of those things are happening without you having to fidget or something. So understand that as a scale, that is an allegory for the same thing as moving or being on a squishy mat surface.
Yeah.
Again, is how do I keep blood flow happening, and how do I take the garbage out to bring the groceries in?
Right. You mentioned fidgeting a few times now, both of you have. And I think it's important to realize that fidgeting is a scientifically studied activity, a non-exercise activity that keeps you above 1.5 mets,
Yes,
right? And so
100%.
fidgeting is really good. So,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times I remember my grandmother telling me to stop fidgeting.
Yeah. No.
Because it was annoying to her. That was
Well,
the
and
reason.
apparently for a lot of people, they learn better when they're actually in movement, kids and adults alike. Like even this thing where, kids weren't supposed to doodle, right? Like that's a form of fidgeting, is doodling. And it actually helps, some kids are going to be able to absorb a lecture or information more if they're actually doodling while they're doing it, because they're able to actually just do this small amount of fidgeting. So I think for those of us, and I'm assuming all three of us in this room fall into this category, who have a strong desire to move, it's pretty critical for us to be able to learn and to feel good in our bodies, to just be able to have opportunities to be in more movement.
And at risk of, everyone needs to move. there was some research that was talked about in David Epstein's wonderful book, The Sports Gene, where they took these mice and researchers started to notice that some mice were running about a mile a day. And then every once in a while, a mouse would pop up and run 3 miles a day. And they were like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
What's about this mouse? So they started breeding those 3-mile mice. And pretty soon they had these super mice that were running like 6 to 7 miles a day. They just loved to run.
Yeah.
And the other mice, 1 mile a day. But when they give those mice Ritalin, they ran 1 mile a day.
Oh,
so
interesting.
The hypothesis there is that we actually have, and we know this, there's larger genetic drive to move.
Sure. And
that's different for all of us. Like we're not weirdos, but we've tested our kids' genes. And we have one daughter who has low sort of genetic drive to move. And if given her preference, she would love to bake. She started a subscription cookie business. She's an entrepreneur, but she'd be like, I'm just going to watch TV and bake. And we were like, knowing this about her, we're like, okay, what sport are you going to be in? We had to really sort of motivate her. My genetic drive to move is like 99th percentile. I'm like, oh, what are we doing? Where are we going? So what we're often seeing is that for some of us, it's easy to move. And for some of us, it's difficult to move. So what we need to do is be thinking, how do I shape my environment so that the environmental constraint sets me up to do what I need to do? Look, I know you don't want to brush your teeth and eat vegetables and fiber, but that's what human beings do. So let's go ahead and pull on your big boy pants and eat the berries.
And figure out how to make that happen for sure. All right, so we're not going to be sedentary. We know that. We're going to incorporate movement into our day-to-day life. However, that's not the whole story, because I can tell you I have a lot of patients that come in and they're not sedentary. They're getting their 8 to 10,000 steps a day. They do the test on your app and we find movement issues.
That's right.
And I look at the human, I see their neck, I see their shoulders, I look at their back, hips, knees, ankles. And so that's kind of how I look at a person's movement deficits. And it could be, maybe just their neck, maybe it's their neck and their hips, maybe it's their knees. And you see these weird patterns of movement deficits. And so I'd love to hear what you found. I mean, you have a ton of data because you guys have the app. I would love to hear where you see the most movement deficits, why those are, and what people can do about them.
Were you just ready to cue Kelly up to talk about his favorite subject, Darshan? Which
I had no idea this
hip
is
extension.
Well, in this situation, remember that
is hip number one.
That's right.
I think
Hip
hip
is number
extension
one.
is number one.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if you're a movement nerd,
Sure.
you're probably going to start at the spine and the pelvis. And then eventually become obsessed with the feet. And then you're like, okay, well, the whole thing matters.
Yeah.
We call it complex regional interdependency, right?
Okay.
And which means is, for example, if you have neck pain, but you don't have complete shoulder function, you can't put your arms over your head,
Right.
it's difficult to put your bra on, you have no internal rotation, then we're never, ever going to actually solve the neck problem until we restore the function of the system. So we should see the neck, the upper back, and the shoulders as a system. The same way now, we're beginning to see the lumbar, the pelvis, and the femur as a system. So if you go to see your physician and she isn't asking you about your hip range of motion, you should leave, because that's like, hey, I'm going to look at how your car is functioning, but I'm only going to look at the steering wheel. We need to understand how these things comport. And what we found to be useful was that if we could come up with some really easy assessments for people, some quick tests. And what we feel like is when we're talking about high performance or limits of human performance, it's 1 or 0. Either can be full range of motion or you're not. But for everyone else, we say red, yellow, green, right? Like, because, my life doesn't depend on my body, to make the catch. So what we find is when we work first on the big primary engines of the hips and shoulders, the spine is the first engine of the body. And that's why we talk about breathing and how are you using your spine and how are we loading and playing. But then the next sort of, valence out is looking at the hips and the shoulders. And it's an easy way for people to understand sort of where they need to begin to start to restore those ranges of motion. The disconnect is that we fail to look at how people's movement practice. Pilates does an amazing job of touching the shapes, exposing isometrics. So if you're doing Pilates on the regular, you're more likely to have complete positions. Yoga, again, same thing, a movement practice. Now, let me be clear. Pilates and yoga do not work on VO2 max. They're not going to build strength, right? They're going to get some strength, some tissue loading, but not the kind we need from kettlebells and and deadlifting. But also, you can't go to the Olympics doing those two things alone.
Sure.
But they're movement practices. modern GPP practices like CrossFit or some of these other practices where we're asking people to express the normative ranges of motion in the language of modern strength and conditioning, pull-ups, being able to squat all the way down, snatch. Some of the root, what we see is turns out that the formal language of strength and conditioning is actually the root language of the body. And now we can say, well, how much of that do I need? Or how much do I want to lean into this piece? But it's a really easy way of making the invisible visible. And that's what we're trying to do is say, instead of doing something and then testing, I should be testing myself every day through my movement practice.
Right.
So sort of because your range of motion is going to be a dynamic change. It's going to be sort of a dynamic system. So if you run a marathon, jump on an airplane, pull a red eye, I'm going to measure your hamstrings, and guess what? It's not going to be great. Your hip flexion is not going to be great.
Right.
But, so what we want people to do is start to think every day, how am I feeling today? And which positions do I need to add in? So when we're asked to come into complex, sports environments, we look at how people are moving, what movements are there, where do we need, hey, we need to spend a little bit more time loading hip extension, or, hey, I see that you're not doing anything truly overhead, or we need to do something where this leg is a little bit more midline. So suddenly the universal root language of human is the push-up, it's the deadlift, it's the pull-up. And now we all can agree it's not how much hip flexion do you have, it's do I have enough range of motion to put my arms on my head to press.
Got it.
The story I always like to tell is that people spend a lot of money and time coming to see Kelly for things like low back pain. And I think that they think he's going to sort of clap his hands together and that he's going to have this like super secret program. And often what he's doing with those folks is telling them to walk more, add more movement to their life, teaching them how to breathe. Because it's a system situation, and then helping them work on their hip extension by doing something called the couch stretch, which we have the couch test in our book. Everybody should try that test for sure. And that turns out to be the systems approach that has been the most effective in helping people with low back pain, which is a very complicated problem and very pervasive. And I think people think that Kelly's going to, do some magic, and it's really this basic stuff of looking at the body as a system
and restoring and exposing.
And the best case scenario for when Kelly has a patient who comes in, and in fact, we think these are really the only patients who are appropriate to see him. Of course, we don't get these patients very often, are the people who've said, okay, Kelly, I have low back pain, but I've done the couch stretch and I've been working on the couch stretch and I've been doing these couple of things. And, I've tried to mobilize upstream and downstream of the pain I have. And these are patients who come in and who have at least tried to take a crack at seeing if they can solve some of these problems. Those are like the best patients who are going to have the best outcomes and maybe only come to see Kelly because they think, okay, these basic things that I've tried on my own to take a crack at this haven't actually worked. So now I'm coming to see you. But there's so many people who come who actually have little injuries that if they just spent 15 minutes taking a crack at it on their living room floor with some basic tools, they could avoid getting on a plane and flying to see Kelly and having this whole thing, because you can actually take a systems approach in addressing your own body. And really that's what our work has been about for so many years, is trying to help empower people with the tools to be able to take care of some of this stuff on their living room floor so they don't have to come see Kelly or they don't have to come see you. They can solve these things on their own.
Every good model has to be able to explain current phenomenon, be able to predict future phenomenon, and be easily communicated. Right? That's the hallmarks of models. And what we've tried to do with Becoming a Supple Leopard, our app, is that is the underlying piece. We have an IP that helps us look at complex human movement behavior into its sort of root constituent shapes, these bookends of positions. And then what we're doing is helping to illuminate people to, what's going on here.
Right.
And then showing them how they can restore, rebuild, recapture these foundational shapes and positions. And when you do that, the body and the brain is clever enough to be like, oh, we'll take that capacity, we'll addition that, let's desensitize that. You changed how the body is functioning, and pain and movement in the brain are mapped in the same pathways. So if we change how you're moving, your brain suddenly is like, well, that's not what that was.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have different hip extension. You're loading differently. Your trunk is functioning differently. You can create higher intra-abdominal pressures. You've restored native ranges. And so the real question here is when and where you're doing that. And when something goes wrong, because pain doesn't mean you're injured. Pain doesn't necessarily mean tissue trauma.
Right.
It's a request for change.
Right.
So we want pain to mean just as much as HRV, just as much as resting heart rate. Like it doesn't mean more or less.
Such a great point.
Right? So your resting heart rate's up a little bit. You're like, oh, I worked out really hard yesterday. Oh, my knee is sore. No big deal.
Yeah.
But my body's giving me input and it's asking for input. And I think when we start to change that relationship, and we don't just mask it with bourbon and ibuprofen, right? Or immediately think, hey, like if you sprain your ankle, everyone's like, I turned my ankle. It's going to be a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Right. But you go see your physician and the physician's like, oh, you have back pain. Let's get an MRI and don't ever lose your back again. And what we see is we haven't empowered people to have a really simple first aid kit to do the care and feeding and then use that to the extent that they want. I want to go to the Olympics, right? Fine. I want to win a world championship. Fine. Same sets of tools used for, hey, my daughter's knee hurts. What am I going to do in my living room to get her out of pain?
Right.
Yeah,
And
and that was how we started this whole business to begin with, Darshan, is that we had our in-house physical therapy clinic, and we started seeing people taking off tons of time during the day, paying us out of pocket because we had a cash-based practice, paying us out of pocket to come see us and our other physical therapists in decades in our clinic. And we were like, and in fact, it was this joke. Kelly would come home at night and he'd say, okay, I had a patient who came in presenting as X, Y, and Z. And, I'm a lawyer and an entrepreneur. I'm not a physical therapist. And I'd be like, oh, her quads are stiff. And we were able to do this sort of I was able to do this armchair diagnoses of
She could give me an intervention to restore range
I
of
love
motion
it.
and tell me what the compensation would look like in movement and tell me what movements this person needed to do to prevent this from
And
doing.
this is just him coming home and saying, let me tell you about this patient I saw today. And I'm not trained. I'm not a physical therapist, but I was able to start to learn and see. And so that's what we've been trying to do with our business all these years is say, hey, before you go get an MRI, I mean, obviously if you have a bone sticking out of your arm, there's obviously major injuries. People, of course, need to go directly to the doctor.
Sure.
Of course. But
Night sweats, dizziness, fever, vomiting,
Right.
nausea,
All
red
those
flags,
things.
go see your doctor.
But, to be a human being means to, and if you're a human being that's ever using your body for anything, you are going to inevitably experience periods where your knee hurts and your back hurts and you tweak something working out. And there are a lot of things that you can do on your own to just take a crack at fixing your body, oftentimes in a short amount of time with some very cheap tools on your living room floor and just
Ball and
a
a roller.
little bit
You
of
need a roller.
information. And you can avoid all of these medical interventions and appointments and time lost and money spent and stress.
We think a lot of these things we're trying to say is, hey, what is skilled care? When you need skilled care, you need an expert to help you look at your lifestyle, to look at some of these pieces, to do prescriptive programming, to help you manage your tissue while it's healing. Everything else is unskilled. Right. And I don't mean it's not sophisticated and complicated and nuanced. I mean, if I can do it myself, then it's unskilled. Right. And what we're realizing is that there's a whole lot of things that we can move out from behind the tent.
Sure.
Which does two things. It empowers people because it really shifts this low side of control back to, well, I was able to self-soothe in my home.
Yes.
I felt better. And don't people are like, it's just, symptoms. I'm like, yeah, if you come in and your shoulder hurts, guess what symptom you want to talk about? Your shoulder hurting, your back hurting. So let's give people those tools while we're improving the root causes.
So coming from the medical establishment as a physician, I think, you've uncovered a lot of things here because one of the things that doctors are trained to say is if something hurts, why are you doing that? Stop doing it.
That's so reasonable, right?
Right.
Yes.
That's reasonable.
Because it stops the complaint. So if my elbow hurts, stop moving your elbow, what you're saying is the opposite is how people should be thinking. How do I move this so I can get out of pain? And I think that's where, like you said, like a lot of this stuff is behind the tent. People don't realize that they can easily access the tools on getting themselves out of pain. And so, what you're saying here would if instituted on a large scale, could totally unburden the medical system and put a lot of money back into people's wallets
Yeah.
just by understanding these principles, right?
Yeah, and I just want to double click on that phrase Kelly said, which is, pain is a request for change.
Yes.
If people leave this podcast with
Yes.
nothing other than sort of a change in perception there,
Mm-hmm.
because once you start thinking about it in those terms, it empowers you to say, okay, if this is a request for change, what can I go and change? What tools do I have at my service to go change those things? And that's a very different sort of mental pathway than I'm in pain. What can someone else or the medical community do
Or
to
how
help
do
me
I
get
cover this up?
Yeah, or how do I
Right.
cover this up? How can
feel
I get to the root cause of this? And I think that is so important and so critical. And I agree. I mean, I read a statistic that up into the year 2000, the primary reason that people went to their primary care physician was the common cold. And starting in 2000 to now, it's actually orthopedic pain.
Sure.
And so I think there is so much we could do to deburden the medical system by just literally giving people some simple tools
Yes,
to take care of their body.
And if we can help people understand that if you're under rested, poorly hydrated, poorly fed, right? No micronutrients, no fiber, you're more likely to be easily sensitized to discomfort. If you're feeling loved and stoked, look, I'll tell you an example. I work at a bunch of universities. I'll see men come in hobbling, knee hurts, shoulder hurts. Other teams come in of other genders, and that pain just goes away.
Sure.
And I think we all can relate to the fact the brain is that powerful.
All of a sudden we can move quicker.
I feel great. It's fine, coach. Put me in. So, what I'm saying is, which thing is not important, right? It is all important. And we need you to walk. We need you to sleep. If you come to me with a chronic pain or persistent pain problem, one of the first things I'm going to do is talk about sleep, because I can't see inputs and outputs until the human being starts to re-regulate to these baselines. Why is Next Health so important to me? Because you're talking about tissue health and brain health at a foundational level. That makes my job easier, because I have people whose bodies are more resilient and more durable and can manage these things without throwing off these simple error messages.
And that's
so
why we
true.
have, half of our book is sort of mobility tests and movement tests, and the other half of the book is more lifestyle stuff.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes people are like, "What is this? You guys are the mobility people, but you have a chapter on nutrition and a chapter on sleep."
Right.
But the reality is that we can't talk to you about your pain, can't talk to you about your movement, unless you're well rested, because we consider that a keystone, habit behavior. We can't talk about your pain and injury if, you report to us that you haven't eaten a vegetable in the last 2 weeks and don't know how to breathe. And so for us, it's none of these things work without the other. And that's why we were like, these are the 10 things that we think are the most critical, of course, in lifting weights.
Yes.
But that's why we have these lifestyle things in our book, even though
they're so
we're known
important.
as the mobility and movement people, but we can't do our job and help people with those things without those foundational behaviors in place.
It's absolutely foundational, and they're all interrelated, and like you said. And
I
so
want a word stronger than foundational. Like essential, vital.
yeah,
Like, what is
right,
it?
Yeah.
Because I think people are like, oh, the base camp, we're like, no. You're either being like a human being or you're not being what the human being
Right.
does. And it's that, like, well, let's just not breathe for a while. Like
See what happens.
It's that important. And I think when we really help people to level set, then it feels less crazy. They feel less crazy about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you get all the benefits. Eating whole foods means you're probably going to sit down and eat foods with other people. And all of a sudden, that's a performance behavior hack, right? Where we see performance gain because we just sat down and had dinner.
Sure.
And so, which one of them is not important? They're all important. For you, if we can find the biggest delta right away, then we're going to get those quick gains. And I love beginner gains. I love the easy gains.
Yeah, people need them.
Yeah, it's okay with me.
Yeah.
I'm
They're
in too.
motivating.
Yeah.
I want to be shredded all the time for no reason. But if we can begin to help people understand and then run this program in the background, then and notice that we've been totally agnostic about the way you train.
Right.
Right? We don't
Absolutely.
and agnostic about the way you eat. You're vegetarian, your culture eats this way, you don't like this food. Again, show me you're getting enough protein, show me you're getting enough micronutrients, show me you're getting enough fiber. We oftentimes run into elite athletes who eat clean but have none of these essentials.
Sure.
right? And so it really is
I see
hard
that
for us
all
to
the
see
time.
inputs and outputs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we measure a lot of blood tests, and we see a lot of elite athletes. We look at their blood tests, and what you find when you look under the hood is a metabolic disaster, inflammation. So it's, to your point, if you're not focusing on those essential behaviors that define us as humans, we really can't work on anything else, right? It just makes no
I
sense.
can't
Right, and-
see I can't understand
And-
what's happening.
Right.
Those
data's dirty.
essential, basic, base camp, vital behaviors we're talking about, whatever word we want to use, most of them are free.
Yeah, they're
I mean,
all free.
other than buying food, which we have to buy food, most of those essential behaviors are free, and then we can then start to layer on some of this more sophisticated stuff on top of that.
Absolutely.
It's almost like those are the 101 class,
Right.
and you need to master the 101 class before you start taking the 102 class. And
For
there's
sure.
so much cool stuff going on in 102 that you are working on, that we're connected to. There's
Yep.
so many awesome, amazing things happening in the 102. But the first step is mastering 101.
Yeah.
And
So you get the most out of this next
Yeah.
level.
So that-
I think
that-
that's
yeah,
really
exactly.
what it is.
Yeah, 102 is really not that effective if 101 is not fully addressed and understood. And,
Exactly.
And so you're almost, giving yourself a harder climb uphill by doing the 102 stuff without mastering 101.
Yeah.
And let me give you an example real quick. I know
Sure.
this is all we think about. So this is
Yeah,
we're
I
so
love
into
this. I
this.
love
As
it.
long as everyone's going to hold on. We have this young 16-year-old daughter. She's a junior.
Sure.
She's a superstar. She's so cool. She's 5'11", and she was a preemie, just everyone. Like this kid's a monster. But in the morning, I want her to, have some micronutrients. I want her to eat some protein. I need carbohydrates to fuel the day. I want her to have something for her gut. I want to have some fruits and veg. So I'm like, good luck, Caroline. And guess what? That's not going to happen. So every morning I rip an emergency open, and she starts an emergency with her creatine. She has a little bite of yogurt, right? I make her a protein, right? She has a multivitamin and vitamin D, because those things show to decrease stress fractures. It's so easy, right? And all of a sudden, when I hand her that in the evening, she takes omegas, right? She takes her magnesium, and what we do is it's not one day. It's months and months and months and years. But if I want my kid to have healthy connective tissue, she needs vitamin C. All those kids are vitamin C depleted. Everyone's vitamin C depleted in the morning when they wake up. All that collagen you're taking, all that chicken skin you're eating, if you didn't have vitamin C, you're not going to be able to load and use it. So, this is an example of saying, hey, what are the essentials? Now, the cleverness for me is, as a parent or as a family member, where do I fit this in so that the right thing happens automatically?
I love that. Yeah. And the same goes for adults as well. So if you're an adult and you're not getting your vitamin C, it works as well. One foundational aspect that we've mentioned a couple times, but I want to double click on, is breathing. And you've said a couple times, if you're not breathing right. So can you...
Well, you're always going to be breathing right, but you may not breathing as effectively as
Yes,
you can. Right? I
yes.
just want to be clear on that, right?
I read James Nestor's book,
so
Breath.
isn't that a great book?
Excellent book. Excellent book. But I'd love for the two of you to highlight a few things that we should be thinking about our breath, because a lot of us don't think about our breath at all. It just kind of happens.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
You can have one lung and still climb Everest.
right.
well,
fact.
and
Exactly.
Kelly can talk about the details of this, but I think what is a little different about our approach is that there are a lot of really smart people talking about breathing.
Sure.
And it's their expertise. Like, we're huge fans of Oxygen Advantage, by the way, if anyone wants to follow them on Instagram. But what oftentimes we see is that people actually are limited in their breathing capacity because they are lacking something like shoulder mobility. So they actually are not able to take the full breath we're asking them to take because their T-spine is stiff or because their
We
trunk
can
is
change
stiff.
your VO2 max by improving your range of motion of your shoulders.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So
Right.
that's I think where we can add to the conversation is saying, hey, of course breathing is important, and we have strategies about how to incorporate, nose only breathing into your life in our book. But I think the conversation we can have is, how can you increase your actual physical capacity to take in more air by making sure you have the appropriate range of motion. Nobody else is talking about that.
Iyengar, great yogi master, says nerves are king of the breath, breath is king of the brain. So the fastest way to change state and consciousness is certainly just to be aware, right? Especially when I'm feeling stressed. But as Juliet says, there are people who are experts on that. We're experts in trying to restore mechanics. Let's get you back to baseline. And for my Tour de France riders, guess what? That really matters. How much air they can move in and out. So here's a simple thing to kind of highlight what Juliet was talking about. If we all just stay in our positions, if you're listening to this, freeze, take the biggest breath in you can. Go ahead. I'll watch. Okay, now get into a position where you can take a bigger breath. So what does that look like? Now notice, I didn't coach or cue anyone. You intuitively knew that you could find a shape where you could get more air in. You splinted yourself. Yeah. We all sat and organized differently. And again, organized is the right word. Well, it turns out we intuitively have this drive that helps us understand it's easier for me to take a big breath. So if I'm on the Peloton, I'm walking, I'm working at my computer, my neck starts to hurt, ask, is there a position where I could have better access to my native physiology? Could I turn more lights on in the room? So suddenly I find a position where I can turn more lights on, and that means take a bigger breath, a more effortless breath. And suddenly what we've just done is increase the capacity of the human being, restored choice, reorganized ourselves into positions that are more effective for us. And I didn't have to coach anyone. Can you breathe better in that position? Yeah. Yes or no?
Right. And back to our standing desk conversation, everybody's going to be able to take a bigger breath standing or perching versus sitting. I mean, hands down, you could just observe that. And so it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And you know what, if we want to get into the weeds and be nerds, if you're
I love
if you're slouched and you're doing all this chest breathing, right, and not accessing your diaphragm because of the positions you're in, it's actually really difficult. You did a really good job of taking a breath in your belly. I really appreciate that. But most of us, if we're sitting down on the computer and what we're doing is actually using all the passive accessory musculature to ventilate, right? So what ends up happening is we're decreasing this big engine and we're using all the little engines, right? The neck, the serratus posterior, superior, like the scalenes, intercostals, right? And I'm breathing here and it's mouth breathing. Guess what your brain interprets that as? Stress, as threat. And so what you're running this program is that you're being chased by a bear, because human beings do not breathe through their mouths up on their neck unless they're being chased or unless it's need to go. So if you want to immediately rewire and input into your nervous system, make sure you're in a position where you can at least breathe through your belly. And be clear, if under large loads, you're going to breathe through the side. You better breathe through your neck. If we're going hard in the paint, who's world champion of the world, you better breathe through your mouth. But if you're always sitting, breathing through your neck, your brain, we know higher cortisol,
constantly
bigger
under
stress,
threat.
you're under threat.
Yeah, it's because the vagus nerve, basically, right? So the vagus nerve runs from our brain to every organ in our body. And if it's not stimulated, it tells your body you're not in a state of relaxation. And so you notice that I was able to breathe through my belly. And that's because one of the breathwork practices that I do is I put a hand on my belly. And that's what gives me the signal that I'm actually using my diaphragm, which is what stimulates the vagus nerve. And so I think hand on belly, breathwork practice at least once a day for even just 2 to 3 minutes. It re-teaches you how to breathe. I think we've forgotten how to breathe as humans were meant to breathe, right?
Well,
And it just brings a little intention to it. I mean,
It
and I love
does,
that
right.
simple cue. You just put your hand on your belly, bring a little bit of intention to it, get yourself back to baseline, and then go about your day.
Right.
there was you can read about old ancestral American traditions, and what you'll see is that there were native practices where they would run with a mouthful of water, right? Constrained, so you had to breathe through the nose.
Yeah,
right?
there was like races where you had to do that.
Kipchoge breaks
Right.
the marathon record, nose breathing. Isn't that interesting? Huh. And it really, what people don't understand is that we have seen just, anecdotal clinical data, and again, clinical data, but changing substrate utilization, nose breathing, mouth breathing. Mouth breathing immediately starts selecting for sugars. Nose breathing starts tapping into the old systems. These systems are so entranced and so sophisticated, you can't believe. So if you're listening to this, just shut your mouth, breathe through your nose whenever you can. Like level one.
Yeah, that's level one.
And then
That is
if
level
you
one.
want to go to the Olympics, we've got lots of tactics to make breathing gnarly and interesting and part of a skilled movement practice.
Well, and everybody has gotten so into and focused on, high intensity interval training these days. And we think that's one of the best places to practice breathing. If we're going to do some horrible assault bike intervals of 30 seconds on and 1 minute off, we will go hard in the paint for 30 seconds, but actually try to recover nose only breathing.
Got it.
And so we figured out a lot of little ways in our own training to add in some breath practice so that if we do lose our chance to have a formal, moment where we're actually practicing breathing, we figured out ways to say, okay, we can do a little bit of breath practice as part of our workout.
Here's a
Yes.
warm-up you can take away.
Yes.
This comes from a world-class track coach. I want you to walk 800 meters as fast as you can, nose only. So her track was just, hey, I want you to walk 800 meters fast, not running, walking. It'll prep you so well. But now I'm going to add in nose only. And I bet you cannot walk briskly doing nose only breathing for 800 meters. I challenge you. You're going to be like, what is
It's
happening?
surprisingly difficult. Like
It
everyone
is.
listening to this is going to be like, I got that.
You're so
It's
CO2
difficult.
intolerant.
Yeah, it's
Your
really
mechanical
difficult.
I'm gonna
system
give that a try,
is
right?
inefficient.
Yeah.
There's just what we find is that there is just piles of gold on the ground. We just want to start gathering up the gold. There's so
Yeah.
many places where we can make people feel better, have better access to the oxygen, better CO2 tolerance.
So is that one of the things that we should do when we go for our after dinner walks, for example?
Yes.
Just try doing it with nose breathing, right?
Yes.
Got
And
it.
that's what, we've talked about this before, but to the extent we're always telling people to do so many things, the only way they're actually going to do it is if they can figure out how to stack behaviors.
it in
So it's
your
like,
life.
we love watching TV, so at least if we're going to do that, let's sit on the floor and do some mobility work. We're obsessed with walking and taking our 20-minute after dinner walk. Well, let's also incorporate some nose breathing in that so that we've, incorporated a breathing practice in our life, but it hasn't been adding on something else. We're just doing it while we're doing something else.
gotta
So
figure
you're
out how to do that.
exactly right. Like, oftentimes we don't have time to practice, to have a formal breath practice in our day, but we are conscious of nose only breathing while we're walking, and that's enough.
Again, I want to keep in mind that we're talking about average middle-aged people
Sure.
and how we still these principles spin up. And that's actually one of the sort of organizing sort of principles of our work is we say, does this scale down and can be regressed towards children, right? To
I notice you guys do that a lot, which is
middle-aged
really
people,
helpful.
And can it scale up to the Olympics? And that means if it can do that, then we're like, that's a really essential behavior, right? That's a foundational behavior. And with some of our teams that we work with, before the national championship, we do 10 minutes of very intentional breathing. We practice long exhale holds, which we're finding out does a lot to sensitize CO2 so we can actually gets the brain more sensitive so we can strip off more oxygen. It means we can work harder, right? It's incredible. Then we do a bunch of very dynamic work on a breath hold. So it's called a dry breath hold. And we'll exhale and we do things like fighting and wrestling. And the first person to breathe loses.
Interesting.
And what we get is we get the brain so comfortable with this gnarly sort of existential terror of drowning
Yes.
that's happening for us fighting. And then when we go and meet the opponent, we can handle higher wattages, we can recover more effectively, the brain doesn't, and we've
So interesting.
primed all the ventilation mechanisms. And most sports, I don't know if you know, have a big breathing component. So I just want to show people that what's nice is that if you have seen these fundamentals in our behaviors in our book, when you come work with me at an elite level, you're going to be like, oh, I see how this scales.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so for the average person, I look at myself, for example, right? I drive to work every day. It's an hour in a car total every day. I'm sitting a lot in front of a computer. You guys pretend I don't have the walking decks, but average people do sit a lot in front of the computer. I have a 1 hour workout scheduled after work.
Great.
How does this individual, male or woman, how do they work in some sort of mobility protecting routine into their life? For your average human out there, how would you get them into what's a good mobility routine or protocol that they can add maybe to their gym workout? Is it a once a week thing? Is it a once a day thing? What do you think?
Well, I'll just start by saying one of the most helpful things my law practice did for me in my now current profession is actually experience the reality of like a real job.
Right.
And what most people have. You obviously also had that as a surgeon, probably, on steroids. But, I really saw what it was like I commuted
No, you're going to
into
get
an
on the
office.
ground in the hospital and stretch, right?
Yeah, I commuted into an office, and I was at an office all day with other people, high stress job. So I was really able to see. And what I learned from that, and we have this idea called the 24-hour duty cycle, and it's about exactly the question you had, where can you fit these things into your
Sure.
life?
Right.
And we try to focus as many of our own healthcare choices into the morning and the evening,
Okay.
because those are the only times we have control. And we get it. I mean, there are
If you
days
get
where,
to the gym, that's heroic.
yeah, there
Yeah.
are days like everybody experiences these days where like the best thing you can do is maybe have 10 minutes to go out and get a salad for lunch, and that's you're in total. So we want to help create structures for people so that your work day is maybe lost and that you still haven't given up on your health, right?
Right.
And so that's why we try to say, okay, we can control the mornings and evenings, and that's where we have to put as much input as we can. And then
Right.
during the day, it's about how can we create a movement-rich environment.
Sure.
Really, I mean, that's really like if that's all you do during the day is make sure you move around positions a lot,
Yeah.
you've already won.
Right.
And so when it comes to a mobility practice, again, we've peppered our house with tools and toys. If you come into our living room, we have Normatec boots, we have massage guns, we have baskets full of foam rollers. So they're literally right there. It makes it super easy to grab those tools.
In the evening.
And then we've already committed to sitting on the floor for 30 minutes a
Right.
night. So it is a stacked behavior. We're sitting on the floor, we're watching a little bit of TV or talking to our kids or checking our phone, and we just grab one of those tools or devices and we spend 10 or 15 minutes working on something. And people say, where do I begin? And, we always say, if you have a painful area, that's where you begin. If there's something that's nagging, pain, if you feel stiff somewhere, begin there. We're sort of like press play to begin.
Yes.
And or if you're just wanting to work on your general mobility, I'm like, take a head to toe approach and, 3 to 5 times a week, 10 minutes. Imagine that. Imagine if people spent 50 minutes a week aggregated over a year in 10-minute increments at night on their living room floor, just putting a little input into their body and putting a little intention into their mobility. Imagine how much of an impact that would have. So to answer your actual question, we would say press play to begin somewhere on your body and start to understand how your body feels and what inputs feel good and make a difference. And try to do that 4 or 5 times a week for 10 minutes. And we've really learned that even that little bit of input, if you're doing it on the regular, it makes a huge difference.
It's such a small amount, 10 minutes. It doesn't need to be like an hour a day. It's
Nope.
very
No.
doable, right?
In fact, what we saw was that people started cutting into their gym time.
Right.
Like if you're in the gym, I want you to be in the gym.
Yeah.
Let's play. Let's learn skills. Let's do all the things we need to do. Let's get all the soft tissue work at home. And what we found is that 10 minutes just rolling around, again, conjoining the behaviors. What was stiff, what's tight, what felt overused, what felt like they need some input. That self-massage turns out to be great parasympathetic input. So if you have a hard time falling asleep, want to stay asleep longer, we're saying don't believe us, check your rings.
Yeah.
What we know is that you are going to fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer if you do some soft tissue. Have you ever gotten a massage? Did you stand up and want to fight someone and sprint? No, you're like so chill. It feels so good.
What Kelly's hinting at is his
true.
biggest pet peeve when he walks into a gym and sees people warming up for a class. There seems to be this trend where people want to warm up for a class by sitting on the ground and rolling their calf on a foam roller.
Yes.
And that's like Kelly's worst nightmare. To warm up for a workout, you want to think about like, I'm warming up for a fight. You need to get hot and sweaty and jump rope and move your body. And like, that's not the time to foam roll, is like
Ask
in 5
yourself,
minutes
if
before
I'm
your
training,
class.
I'm getting ready for a fight. If I was going to fight you right now, would you lay on the ground and start rolling your calves out? Nope. So maybe that's a behavior that we could shift somewhere else.
Exactly.
The other thing I want to say is that, and you can, even this morning, Juliet will attest, we love, like I saw sun salutation in yoga, and I was like, that's really clever. But it's sort of in the trappings of yoga.
Right.
So what we found was that we created something called the hip spin up, the shoulder
You've done
spin
that
up,
with us.
Yeah.
and the breath spin up.
Yes.
And we try to have people choose one of those things in the morning.
Say those 3 again.
The hip spin up,
Yep.
the shoulder spin up, or the breath spin up.
The breast spin up.
And
okay.
we can, we'll send you the link, but if you just search Kelly Starrett or the Ready State hip spin up, you can see it there. And what we do is like 10 minutes in the morning or 5 minutes in the morning, move your body a little bit, spend some time in these end positions. And what you'll find is that for the rest of the day, you feel a little bit better. And it's quicker to get into your warm up. So like a credit card, if I put one crease in it, it's not really changing, but lots of creases, my brain starts to say, hey, I want to have access to these positions. It's going to get easier and easier. And it begins to restore native ranges, but also I'm better prepped for the rest of the day. So I can get to the gym and jump right into class, or I can sneak in my run.
Yeah.
And suddenly what we've done is built out a really thorough movement day.
Yes.
And then tomorrow, you're going to wake up and be like, holy moly, I was overwhelmed with how much I moved. I'm going to have to take care of myself because this is how much movement I need as a human being.
And, you know, people often ask us, like, is there a right time to do this kind of soft tissue work? And our answer to that question is like, when you will do it. I mean, we prefer to do it in the evening because we already find that we're sitting on the ground and we have all these tools available. And, you know, that's how we like to relax and prepare for bed. So for us, that's a really good strategy. But if that's not a good time for people, or you really just prefer to lay on your couch at night, great. Then try to fit in those 10 minutes in the morning doing one of these spin ups or any soft tissue work that feels good on your body.
I'm a performance physical therapist at Cal Berkeley. One day a week, I run recovery mobility sessions for the athletes there and the teams there. And part of what we're doing is teaching them how they can do this to themselves, how they can do this with their partners, how they can do it with their teammates.
Yeah.
And what we've done is tried to say, hey, we want you to own and control this, and you should have access to this. And this doesn't mean you need to go see a trainer or activate the EMS system. And look, if your back is so bad that you can't go to work, that's a medical emergency.
Right.
Go get some help.
Right.
But if your back is sore, that's not an injury. You have a sore back.
Yeah.
So let's become curious and ask about that. And what you'll find is that you'll find your right concoction of things that you need to do. And you're like, when I do that, my back feels better.
Yeah.
And then you'll be a human being and you'll forget. But what we're working on is let's give people those tools first. Let's democratize that so we can have the next conversation already. Because
Right.
102 is where it gets real fun.
And I
Right,
can't
right.
tell you how many stories we have of non-believers who come in with, like, let's say knee pain.
Yeah.
And we say, your quads are super stiff. You need to spend time working on your quads. And they're skeptical.
Yeah.
They're like, no, yeah,
Good,
no,
fine.
fine. But they do it. They're like, okay, I'm going to be a good student. I'm going to do it. And, you know, 2 or 3 days later, we get a call, and this has happened literally 1,000 times, where people are like, oh my God, my knee has been bothering me for 6 months. And I just rolled my quads the last 3 nights for 10 minutes. And like, I don't have knee pain for the first time.
That's incredible.
And that is a common conversation we have with people. So they start off skeptical, like there's no way I'm going to be able to make change in my own body like this and be able to resolve this ongoing sort of nagging pain I've had. And they can. They've done it themselves in 10 minutes on
People
their
come
own.
to
That's
Next Health,
amazing. Yeah.
and you're realizing that no one really told you how to eat.
Right.
No one told you how to self-soothe when you were stressed. No one told you how to sleep. No one told you, right? We check the boxes.
Yeah.
And what we also haven't told people is how to take care of the body.
Absolutely.
When something hurts. And there are better traditions and cultural heritages where we do touch and we have non-sexual touch and there's massage. Go to Thailand. Thai massage is unbelievable, right?
Unbelievable.
Every day we got one when
And,
we were in Thailand. It was the best.
when the 65-year-old woman
love
is
it.
staining her heel in my
Yes,
T-band and
yeah.
I'm tapping out and she's like, no.
No.
Like,
Where did
no,
you go?
what are you doing? Like, that's not fixed yet. So, I think what's amazing is that when we start a little bit, people are shocked because the gains are so fast.
Yeah.
But we believe that sport creates this beautiful framework and scaffolding for us to be able to begin to understand mindset and positive self-talk and all the things that make us better human beings.
Sure.
Well, let's just go and say, instead of using the word sport, let's use the word fitness and health. And we believe that every human being should be able to perform basic maintenance on themselves.
No, absolutely. It's so funny because when we see patients at Next Health, and when I see patients, they come in, say, with knee pain, and the first thing they want to ask me for is an MRI of their knee. And none of this has been addressed. So many times I'll have them download your app and just start from there. Like, let's do an assessment. You have so many programs on the app as well that people can go through way before they should consider doing an MRI.
Yes.
Yeah, it's expensive. It's not a
Yeah.
good use of your time. And more importantly, it's not prescriptive.
Right.
Because so one of the things, I'm a big fan of diagnostic imaging. It's
Sure,
super
of
cool,
course.
right? But I tell people, well, are you going to have surgery? And I was like, they're like, no. And I was like, well, why are you getting an MRI? Because it's not going to change what your behaviors are. And so, again, this isn't a conversation about should we have an MRI or not, but it is the conversation that people don't know what to do first.
Right.
And we want to
That's
jump
exactly
to
right.
complexity, and we've trained people for that. And now we're beginning to out-train them.
And I think that's where we go back to this sort of thought experiment of saying, okay, something's bothering me on my body. Rather than saying I need an MRI to yourself, say, this is a request for change. What can I control? What can I change?
Right.
And oftentimes that's as simple as, foam rolling your quads or, sitting in the Normatec boots for the night or whatever it is. But there's so much you can control with just a little bit of, doing a different thought experiment when you experience that kind of pain.
Congested tissues are more easily sensitized.
Yes, absolutely.
Congested tissues don't heal as quickly. Collagen does not knit together when you're super swollen. Do not bring your gross swollen ankle to your doctor. Like you know, she is going to be so bummed. Why'd you bring that in here? Why aren't you managing that? You know?
So true. You know, I just realized there is one bucket that we haven't touched on yet, and that is balance. And one of the things that I love that I do all the time now is I try to put my socks and shoes on
Yes.
without, you know, standing up, without holding on to something.
So easy, and you do it every day or
Every day.
when you remember
Yeah.
it.
Right,
Right.
right.
So now we have this really complex dynamic
Yeah.
balance test
Right.
where you have to stand on one leg without putting anything down, reach down, grab your sock, put it on, put your shoe on, and you're going to put your shoes on every day, so you might as well do this too.
Yeah. When do people stop losing their balance? When do they start losing their balance, or when do you see this happen to people where their balance is off? Because you know the compounding effect of losing balance is falling,
False. Yeah.
and those can be disastrous as we age. So what are your
Well,
thoughts
in
on
our
that?
own life, the example I always like to give, and she kind of gets mad sometimes, but my mom, who is fit and lean and has always been athletic and moved her body a ton, but she didn't do a lot of activity that required her to touch on her balance and practice balance. And so starting in her early 60s, she actually really didn't feel comfortable riding a bike anymore. And she figured that out by going on a vacation and just trying to rent like a, you know, beach cruiser. She actually didn't feel that she actually had the balance skill. So that's her early 60s. And I think that's when oftentimes people really start to see it, right? They're starting to lose some of their muscle mass and their bone density's down. They haven't been doing sports or activities that require them to practice their balance.
Right.
And that does totally increase their risk of falls. You know, the old man balance test is what you're talking about, where you're
Yes.
putting your shoes and socks on. I literally do that like 5 or 6 days a week when I'm actually putting on my shoes or socks. It's so simple to incorporate. Sometimes I stand while I'm brushing my teeth on one leg. I think that's another simple way to just incorporate some balance practice because, you know, people should be able to stand on one leg, and hopefully you're brushing your teeth twice a day for 2 minutes aside. So you're getting in 4 minutes of balance work when you're brushing your teeth. So it is something that you can maintain if you just touch it a little bit.
And look, your ear is going to change as you get older. Your vestibular system is going to become a little stiffer and a little less reactive. Don't believe me? Let's go to an amusement park and I'll throw you in a spinny ride and you can see what I'm talking about. But you know, one of the things that we see is that these systems, again, imminently trainable. But if we're not challenging them, then they're just going to decay or become attenuate in their function. The test that we want to remind everyone is that practice that you talked about was great. Yeah. But the SOLEC is a really standardized test. Right. And that's standing one leg, eyes closed, SOLEC. Right now, you should stand up and you should be able to close your eyes once you've oriented, and you should be able to stand there without putting your foot down for 20 seconds.
So stand on one leg, eyes closed. That's
and what
SOLEC.
you'll be shocked at how difficult that is if it's untrained. So it's easy to set yourself up against a wall so you don't crash and burn. You can do that whenever you want. But that isn't actually an easy test, just so we're clear. Like if you are like, holy moly, I'm an elite athlete and you can't stand on one leg with your eyes closed, guess what? You've found a deficit.
Right.
So again, scaling back up, what we found is that when we started putting sort of distinct balance challenges and play into our athletes' lives, they ran better, they performed better, they had better integration from feet, back started to feel better, feet were stronger. And what we found was that instead of loading it into the gym, we put it in the kitchen. We gave everyone a slack block, which is a little mini slack line on a piece of foam. It's this big. It's in your kitchen. And if you're in your kitchen, you're like, oh, might as well be there.
And we have a slack block and something called a gibboard in our kitchen.
Okay.
It's a sort of a slack line on a board. It looks like a skateboard with a slack line.
Right.
We have those things literally sitting in our kitchen.
And they're beautiful
Really?
objects.
And they're cool. And so the most amazing thing to talk about, speaking of the scaling up, scaling down, is that we have lots of teenage kids come into our house because we have teenagers with lots of kids coming in and out. You probably have a lot of kids coming in and out of your house. And kids are just drawn immediately to that. So they come in after school, they want to eat a snack.
Oh, don't make it fun, Julie.
There's just like some kid over there balancing on this device and some kid balancing. I mean, they just are immediately drawn to try to figure out how they can balance and have a conversation on these devices.
I got to get the links to order those
we will.
because I
We'll
would
give you the
love to
links.
put them
And
in the show notes.
we're fans of those companies. Don't have any stake in them whatsoever. We just are fans of their product, and we have the slack blocks and the gibboards in our office. You know, again, part of this whole movement rich environment. It's just a simple way to practice balance. That's also fun.
And no one's going to go to a balance class. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and jump into a yoga class and spend a lot of time on one leg in a yoga class. And you're going to be like, she hates me.
Yeah.
This guy hates me. Why is he making me stand on one leg? Because foundationally, in this yoga practice, we understood we need to challenge your balance. Yeah. And it's such an easy way to try to winnow it in. We found that if we put it in our athletes' kitchens, we got a lot of exposure in the background, and it wasn't one more thing we needed them to do. Right now, in high performance, in all these teams and sports, we're trying to strip things out. Let's make it more simple, and let's scatter it around the rest of the day so it doesn't feel like there's another, let me just go to my app and do another thing. Right now I'm doing the balance. Yeah. Like, if you're in there watching TV or you're waiting for the water to boil, you're going to feel better.
It's already there, right?
And
exactly.
You're going to perform better. Your feet will feel better. We have a lot of people who say, hey, I have to get this pain in the bottom of my feet. I'm like, don't take this the wrong way, but your feet are so weak and shut down. So let's just get some input into this miraculous machine.
Right. So if, once again, back to the 30 or 40-year-old person, 50-year-old person, doesn't matter. And they are looking, they've heard this podcast, right? And they're saying, okay, I'm convinced I need to add balance, mobility, movement back into my life. What's a good starting point for that person if this is not something they've ever thought about before?
I think the biggest starting point would be to sit on the ground for 30 minutes a day.
Okay.
I think that it combines
preferably
so many
reading
things.
your book.
Yeah,
You can get
exactly.
the
But
book.
it's a little bit of balance practice.
Sure.
You're practicing getting up and down off the ground. There's some built-in, almost passive hip mobility because you're going to be changing positions in order to make it comfortable. You're going to be getting back up off the ground. So, I mean, if people just did one thing after this, and that is incorporate 30 minutes of floor sitting a day, already people's bodies would feel better.
Yeah, I love it. Do you have a suggestion there as well?
I would say the second thing I would layer in is let's stop messing around with your sleep. And if a human being that is well rested, and that means you need to lay in bed for 8 hours. I know that you're special and you're unique, but that's not what the data suggests. So what we know is that if you can't sleep for that full 8 hours, resting is the next best thing. We're talking about brain health. We're talking about tissue health. We're talking about growth hormone release. If we're not sleeping, we can't see anything else. The number one thing that I can do to reduce your risk of injury is improve your sleep.
Sure.
And so if we really want to get ahead, let's make sleep that foundational practice, and you will be shocked at how much better you feel.
Yeah, it's one of your 10 vital signs in the book.
It has to be.
And I want to emphasize, the book is such an easy read. You can read it in a few hours.
We made it. This is the secret. We made it for physicians and practitioners to give to their patients, to say, there's no way we can cover all the things we want to cover here. We want you to do this. Or all the super users out here who are listening, you have an auntie or an uncle who thinks you're crazy. In your obsession with health and loving to exercise, this was a way where we could bring our families and our neighbors into this conversation about health because it's so accessible.
Yeah, it's incredibly accessible, and then you make it even more accessible with the app, which, I want to emphasize, there is a test. And so I think getting that quantification of something is in the red, yellow, or green, like I said, most people don't even know that until they take the test. They have no idea. And then the videos on the app also make a huge difference. Yeah. You mentioned a couple of times, both of you, the 102. What is the 102 that you guys are seeing the next level here? For people that want a little taste of that?
What we see is that there are these essential behaviors where, we need to spend most of our time. And that's sleep, nutrition, being in a community, feeling loved,
moving a lot.
Yeah. And then that second piece is a lot of the diagnostics.
Sure.
Where tracking things, getting blood panels, right? People want to jump to that. And we think that 20% is really important.
Yes.
Right? And it really can inform. But if you didn't do all of that and you did all of this foundational pieces first, that level 101 kind of foundation piece, you would test better as soon as we got up there, right? Like if I come in here, I come Next Health, you should be helping me solve genetic lifestyle problems that are totally blind to me.
Right.
Not solving problems because I don't sleep and I eat like a spoiled teenager,
That's so
right?
true.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, let's
Right.
let's
Yeah.
honor that. For us, we have a level 1 course which helps people understand the foundations, and then we have a level 2 for practitioners. So our 102 course, like college, we're saying, hey, ready to have the next conversation?
Right.
Because now, how do we apply this? How do we? And what you'll see is sort of in this scaling. Our book, Built to Move, is sort of -1. Our app test is our level 1, done by a person who doesn't have to have a PhD in this or be an expert. And then our level 2 is really the full assessments. How do we put our hands on? How do we manage this? So we're trying to kind of create tiers of sophistication. Start here. When you're ready to have the next conversation, we're here.
Got it.
We have to be able to slide up and down quickly.
It's such a beautiful overall program, especially for me as a practitioner, because I read Built to Move. I immediately started handing the book out to patients. And then the conversation is always like, okay, I read the book and I did the test. Now what do I do? After you find deficits, I'm like, okay, well then get the app. There's videos in there. And I'm so excited to know that there's a practitioner course that you're putting out as well. Because I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast are practitioners actually. And so how would they access that course?
Well, the first thing is if you go to thereadystate.com, there are professional courses.
Okay.
And everything can be studied on your own.
Okay.
The 102, we run through a cohort for 6 weeks because we find that people do need feedback and they need mentoring. We do weekly coaching calls for that. And, again, how much musculoskeletal care did you get as a physician? An hour?
0. I mean, the same amount as nutrition and sleep. Basically an hour, maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
And so what we see is that everyone's a product of their system. And now we're saying, hey, it's really useful if someone comes in with low back pain or hip pain for you to have some really simple assessments. And not ninja level craziness, but just some simple assessments. Let's begin a conversation here. And then some easy, applications, some easy fixes. And, even in our level 1 class, we say, hey, here's our simple assessment. And here are 3 to 5 things that we do that we know improves hip flexion.
Right.
So it's really a simple way to be able to do that. And then, again, we can scale this up, infinitely to be more and more sophisticated. We have incredible programs and that run our system underneath their strength conditioning at the highest levels of sports and performance. So but we have to take a systems approach. We're so grateful that we just get to be in this one vertical. I don't ever want to understand liver enzymes, so you're welcome to it.
I'll take care of that
and then
one
I'm
for
going to
you.
add one more thing because we are launching a program we're really excited about in January called the Starretts system, and it's our first foray into a very holistic lifestyle and durability coaching program. Because what we see and is that people have a lot of information at this point and a lot of access to information. And it's amazing and it's really changed the conversation, but there still is this challenge with implementation. And so we feel like, given our experience running a gym and working with clients for 20 years, along with all of our work and experience around Built to Move and the work with the Ready State we do, that, we're uniquely suited to really help people go through a lifestyle coaching program intervention that's designed to be super holistic and actually help with that question you're talking about is, okay, I know I'm missing all these things. How do I actually get to do it?
4 exercise sessions a week that you can choose which in order you
that's
want.
fantastic.
We're working on sprinting. We're actually doing the programming.
Yeah, there's actual strength and conditioning.
That's right.
Mobility programming. 10 we'll program for you. Play it on the video. We'll do it for you. 10 minutes, follow along. 1 20-minute session on the weekend. We've got part of your deal is you got to hit the steps. We look at macros and essentials. And then part of our programming, believe it or not, is you need to go on the outside and play for 80 minutes a week. And what we'll say is this is what we call the 8s. Did you get 8 hours of sleep? Did you eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables? Right? Did you get at least 0.8 grams of protein per pound body weight? Right? Did you play for 80 minutes? And what we started outside, you got to get
Ideally.
that. So suddenly we're like, oh, the basics. Let's at least hit the 8s.
I love it.
Yeah, so
I
the
love
goal
that
with the Starretts
structure,
system
yes.
is just to help with that implementation piece.
And what
Got
we
it.
after we
Yeah.
came to the conference that you put on, what we found was a lot of people were saying, okay, I'm really in, but I need the program. And we're like, okay, we're ready to help people solve this problem and be able to fit into
in a
their lives.
holistic way. And also it's really going to be designed for people who have busy jobs and time crunched lives. And it's going to be designed so that they can actually fit it in.
And if you can only
make a difference.
exercise Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you want to do it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then take 3 days, we don't care. But we're like, during the course of the week, here's the amount of kind of loading that we're doing. And then what's really fun for us is we get to stitch together the exercise programming as exposure to full range of motion and to be able to breathe hard and sprint. So we're going to hit your VO2 max needs, we're sprinting needs. I love that you brought up sprinting early on. We do one workout a week is some kind of sprinting, right? It might be on a bike, it might be on a rower, but we're going to get you sprinting again and being fast again. And then we've got to get you playing.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's genius. I can't wait to do that. And would this be something that someone signs up through the app, or will it be on the website?
It'll be on the website on the Ready State, and
Great.
we're planning to launch it on, I believe, the week of January 15th.
Wow,
2025.
maybe we can
So it's
launch
coming
this
soon.
podcast at the same time.
Love it.
Yeah.
Trying to help busy people simplify their lives.
Okay,
Right?
I
This
would
is
love
an
to.
integrated approach, and you'll see that you're like, wow, this is really easy to follow. And unlike, we're not after quick fat loss gimmicks. There's no fasting. It's not just about bodybuilding and being skinny. Like we see
In
so
fact,
much
we
of that.
specifically say we're not that. You know, for people who want to have, if their goal is shredded abs, our program, like we've gotten really clear about who we're for and not for.
Right.
And if goal is shredded abs, we're not for those people, because we are trying to, we're trying to help people create a durable body
Yeah.
that can say yes to adventure. Like,
Right.
that's the goal.
People that want to have health span and are not necessarily after, like you said, ripped
Aesthetics.
abs or or aesthetics, or just, maybe they don't even care about running a marathon or whatever.
Right.
I just want to live a healthy life and be
Yes.
able to feel good and travel and
Body
eat what I
present for
want.
my
composition and
grandkids.
aesthetics
Right.
cannot be our only metrics of
Right.
physical health.
Absolutely.
And that's what we've done right now is we've told everyone, unless you rip off your shirt and you have a 12-pack, you're a failure.
Right.
Right. And so, and what we see is there's a lot of models out there where people are in brutal calorie restriction, right? And then the second the program is over, they're done with that forever.
Yeah.
If you leave our program after 90 days, you would continue to do all of the things, and you would feel like if you didn't do those things, you'd be slipping backwards. And it's so effortless. And I don't mean like it's hard. What I mean is like you're not going to finish and be like, thank goodness I'm out of here. I'll never do that
Right.
again. We are trying to teach you what to do so that you can be sustainable and then end up in any environment and thrive.
That's fantastic, because I love the jump from here's the information and now this is the implementation.
Exactly. Yes.
Which
Devil's
is the
in the
key.
details.
The
Yeah,
devil's
that
in the
is-
details.
we
right.
felt like that was the missing piece, because we were
Right.
like heavy on information and not enough implementation, and people are searching for that.
This
and they're
is
searching
genius.
for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we want to get people out of pain.
Right.
So I think what's amazing is in 2 weeks of the program, you will be a different person.
I
And in
can see that.
3 months, people will be like, what drugs are you taking? Because I want that.
I love it. Yeah, one last thing I want to touch on is in everything you guys do, you weave in community. And I love that so much, because it is, I think that we can also consider that foundational, but you never see that in any, health program. You never see it in any.
Hard to quantify,
It's
isn't it?
hard to quantify community, and just knowing you guys personally, how you tie in community and your kids into everything you do, is just number one, it's inspiring. But number two, I think, just like we said before, it's essential, because if you're not tying this in, if you're just one of these people that are like working all day, going to the gym, not talking to anybody, coming home, doing your meal prepping for the rest of the day, and you're skipping all of that aspect, you're missing out on another essential part of life. And I'd love for you guys to just maybe expound on that a little bit and tell us how you came upon that and how you work it into everything you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both somehow, in fact, I think it's our biggest skill we have as entrepreneurs, and is the ability to constantly create community. It's what we've done with all of our businesses. I think it began when we started a gym and realized that we actually didn't start it because we were excited necessarily about CrossFit or the CrossFit methodology, but we'd had this early experience of realizing how much joy and improvement we could get by doing these workouts in a community. And
Training
so,
together.
and training together, and how powerful training together was. And I think that probably is because we both had been on teams as professional athletes and college athletes, and we were seeking that again, in our early 30s when we started our gym. But man, I think we just both got so much joy and pleasure from creating community that it's just been how, I created the walking school bus. There's just, we're always trying to figure out how we can create exercise communities and eating communities. And I think it's how we keep, I think it's really the only real accountability measure as well. I mean, if we're not, as you know, if you're around people who eat well and don't drink too much and walk outside, then that's who you become.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't know why we're good at that or how that became to be, but we definitely think it's of the utmost importance.
Yeah.
Social isolation, depression. I mean, we should look at the human brain as it's only a brain if it's around other brains.
That's powerful. Yes.
And, our ability to interact with other people, humans are what's most important. That is our belief. And the environment is important, and going to space is important, and science is important. But for us, human beings are most important. And I know that's a very human-centric view on the planet, but if we take care of humans, we'll probably take care of the planet better. So, but, what really means is that we find that people are healthier and have more fun and joy when they interact. And, you can see this on that TV show Alone, where people go out in the woods and they're doing this primitive living, and eventually they're devastated because they're not around other people. So otherwise, they're sociopaths. And that's what drives us back. So we need this interaction. And it's just, with the old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with friends. And one of the things that I can speak to in my 40s, I'm now 51, is that I see a lot of men don't have they have their college friends, they have my bro that I can call up, but they don't have a network where people can be vulnerable, that you haven't created a place to get feedback, to downregulate, to chill, to play. We have a mountain bike club on Saturday. Right. We ride, again, Juliet is my partner. She's my best friend. We love spending time together, but Juliet also has friends. Yeah. And I cannot meet all of her needs. And so we have to think critically about layering in those relationships, building that. One of my best friends lives across the street. He also is a sick mountain biker, also has a sauna. And on Thursday nights, we sauna together and just really get to talk about our lives and create that opportunity where we can feel nurtured and feel seen and feel validated. And if you look at the research around network theory, around communications, if you live in a community where people see you, those loose network associations where someone just identifies you actually is a better predictor of health than almost any other thing. Like, hey, what's going on? Hey, I haven't seen you. How are your kids? Like, I don't know your name, but we've known each other for 10 years.
The Harvard study, the longest running study on happiness.
Yeah,
Community was a number one factor, right?
Yeah, I'll never forget seeing that, and I think that has really impacted how we've approached things. I went to some conference way back in like 2008, and whoever was doing the presentation put up this slide that was so impactful for me about how important community was from the Harvard study and how it far outweighed all these other things that we spend all this time talking about in terms of nutrition and even sleep and all these things that we all spend all of our lives talking about. And that really impacted me. I was like, okay, all these other things are important, but if you are doing all these other things perfectly and alone, it's not going to work.
You're going to die.
Yeah. No, you're still going to die, right?
Yep.
Exactly.
You're going to die. From the perspective that, very simply, borrowing this from some incredible music artist who said, I want to do dope shit with dope people.
Yes.
Right?
And on that note, this podcast has been incredible. I think we talked about some dope shit, and I did it with some dope people here, and I'm so glad that I've met both of you. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us today. I think I learned a lot personally, and I can't wait to do the Starretts system in January. So maybe we'll release this podcast around then, and people will be motivated to get on and do it as well. I'm going to do it myself. Is there any other places where people can find you?
Well, before I say that, I just want to say what huge fans we are of you and the work you're doing, and give you I don't know when this is coming out, and it will already be a raging success by then, but I just want to congratulate you on this podcast. It's you have such an important voice in this space, so thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
And people can find us at thereadystate.com. That's our website, at The Ready State on Instagram, and then I'm also at Juliet Starrett on Instagram, and those are kind of the places we live, at least digitally.
And all of this we can measure success, but how well we've been able to democratize all of these things to transform our society.
Absolutely. I think that's key. And, I think the whole world of physical therapy and, what do you do when you have pain has been so locked up in Western medicine and behind the veil of physical therapy. And you have to go see someone and
Yeah.
pay for it. And it costs money and time and energy. And it doesn't need to be. And I really thank you for writing that book and putting this out there and giving us the tools so that we can take care of this at home like we used to as humans for millennia before we before we developed this whole
right.
system that kind of locked up this knowledge. And I thank you for joining this podcast, and I can't wait to have you
you
on
so
again.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you both.